car. He naturally pulls away from the crowd, not because he hates people, but because the usual way of connecting stops making sense. Most conversations revolve around status, gossip, or complaints, and once he begins to see through that, it gets harder to engage. He's not bitter. He's not isolating himself out of pride. He's just stopped chasing what others are still chasing. He starts to notice the performance in everyday interaction, the need to be liked, to belong, to say the right thing. And without making a big deal about it, he quietly steps back. People might still wave. They might still offer small talk, but the connection is no longer there because it was never real to begin with. He didn't cut ties, he didn't burn bridges. He simply stopped pretending. And when he does that, distance happens on its own. This is the beginning of solitude, not loneliness, just space between who he used to be and who he's becoming. He starts to see clearly what holds people together isn't real. It's not depth, it's not truth. It's habit, comfort, and shared illusions. People bond over complaining about their jobs, over chasing status, over defending ideas they've never truly questioned. He used to do the same. He used to think that was connection, but now it feels more like noise. He notices how often people speak, just to avoid silence. How much energy goes into keeping up appearances, the constant need for validation, for agreement, for reassurance. And once he no longer needs those things himself, he sees how dependent others are on them, how relationships often survive not because of honesty, but because everyone agrees to keep the story going. He understands why people hold on to what feels familiar. He still cares. He still listens, but he no longer plays along. That shift, subtle as it is, creates distance all on its own. From the outside, he might seem the same. He still shows up. He's still polite. He hasn't disappeared completely. But something fundamental has shifted, and the people around him can feel it, even if they can't name it. They sense that he's no longer trying to impress anyone, that he's not looking for approval, that he's not playing the social game anymore. Some find it admirable, others find it unsettling, because he's no longer easy to read, because he's not performing for anyone. He doesn't flatter, doesn't compete, doesn't entertain, and that makes him hard to place. People might say he's distant, or too quiet, or that he's changed. What they really mean is, he no longer fits into the roles they've grown used to. They liked him better when he reflected their values. Now, he reflects something else, something still, grounded, and not dependent on being liked. People see him, but they don't really know him, because knowing him now would require them to see what he sees, and most people aren't ready for that. He once believed that staying connected meant staying involved, showing up, participating in conversations, maintaining appearances. But with time, that definition changed. As his priorities shifted inward, he stopped engaging out of obligation, not because he cared less, but because he no longer needed others to affirm his place in the world. He still values connection, but not if it depends on constant engagement, emotional performance, or subtle negotiation for approval. He doesn't withdraw out of resentment. He simply no longer finds value in maintaining relationships built on pretense or expectation. To those accustomed to transactional connection, his presence can feel distant. But in truth, he's simply not playing the same role anymore. He no longer speaks just to keep the peace. He no longer sees himself through other people's eyes. What emerges in that space is not loneliness, but clarity. A calm independence that allows him to remain rooted even when others come and go. He's become honest, and from that honesty, a deeper kind of freedom begins to take shape. From the outside, solitude is often misunderstood. To most people, being alone signals a lack of friends, of purpose, of belonging. But for a man who has begun to see clearly, solitude becomes something else entirely. He no longer fills his time with distractions, just to avoid being alone with himself. He no longer seeks out constant company, to escape discomfort. He's learned to sit in silence without needing it to end. What others describe as loneliness is often just unfamiliar stillness. They equate the absence of noise with emptiness. He's realized that most of what fills a typical day, talks, tasks, and duties, is just noise pretending to be important. In solitude, he sees himself without distortion. There's no one to impress, no image to maintain, and that clarity, while uncomfortable at first, becomes a source of strength. He doesn't avoid people, but he also no longer depends on them to feel complete. This shift usually confuses others. They assume he must be withdrawn, disconnected, or even arrogant. But in truth, he's simply content with his own presence. He has faced the silence most people run from and discovered it wasn't silence at all. It was peace. As he grows more inwardly stable, he becomes less predictable to others. Not by intent, but by the simple fact that he no longer participates in the subtle exchanges that define most social interaction. He does not mirror emotions to gain approval. He does not offer reassurance when it would mean denying what he sees. To those still dependent on external validation, this creates discomfort. They may interpret his neutrality as arrogance, his silence as judgment, his detachment as disinterest. In reality, he is none of those things. He's simply no longer invested in managing perception. Much of what people call connection is actually a performance, a mutual agreement to keep certain illusions intact. Once he steps outside that arrangement, he disrupts it just by being present. He doesn't argue or provoke or attempt to convert anyone to his view, but the absence of familiar signals, approval, flattery, emotional reinforcement, makes others uneasy. Many of his previous friendships begin to fade, not because of conflict, but because the foundation they stood on no longer holds. He begins to notice how often relationships are maintained through shared complaints, routine habits, or the mutual reinforcement of personal narratives. Once he no longer participates in those patterns, the connection weakens on its own. He no longer feels compelled to offer agreement for the sake of belonging. He no longer entertains conversations that avoid substance, and he has no interest in maintaining ties that require him to shrink himself. This shift is not a rejection of others. It's the result of a change in what he's willing to invest his energy in. True friendship becomes something quieter, simpler, and far more rare. It is no longer based on shared illusions, but on mutual recognition. Two people who don't need each other, yet choose to walk alongside one another without expectation. These kinds of connections cannot be manufactured. They emerge naturally, if at all, and only when both individuals have stopped seeking to be completed by the other. Most social interaction relies on unspoken rules. You validate my perspective, I'll validate yours. We won't go too deep. We won't challenge each other's assumptions. We'll pretend we agree, even if we don't. He used to play by those rules because everyone did. But once he starts operating outside of them, the dynamic begins to break down. He no longer gives comfort just to ease tension. He doesn't pretend to agree when he doesn't. He's done with the little acts that keep everyone else feeling safe, but keep him feeling false. This isn't defiance, it's clarity. And that clarity is disruptive because it exposes how much of everyday life is based on mutual avoidance of truth. People notice, even if they don't understand what's changed. They feel the shift. They sense that something familiar has gone missing. The constant exchange of comfort, validation, and distraction. And without him feeding the system weakens. Talks start to feel awkward. People stop reaching out as much. What used to feel warm and familiar now feels tense and uneasy. Not because he did something wrong, but because he stopped playing along. He hasn't rejected anyone. He simply stopped reinforcing a structure he no longer believes in. As his understanding deepens, something unexpected happens. He begins to need less, not just materially, but emotionally, socially, even intellectually. He no longer seeks recognition. He no longer relies on others to confirm what he already knows internally. And as that need dissolves, so do many of the relationships that once required it. This is the paradox. The clearer he becomes, the quieter his life becomes. Not because he's closed off, but because so much of what once filled his time was rooted in a search for external affirmation. Without that search, most social activity feels optional, if not unnecessary. He stops trying to be understood. He stops needing to explain. He no longer measures his presence by how much space he takes up in other people's lives. From the outside, this might look like withdrawal, but inside it's the opposite, a settling into something solid and real. He still values connection, but only when it emerges naturally, without demand or performance. He hasn't become cold. He is simply no longer dependent. And in that detachment, there's a kind of depth that can't be found through attachment. Once he wakes up, he can't unsee what he sees. He looks inward, and the noise quiets. He looks outward, and the world is still asleep. He sees the false certainty in people's eyes, the roles they perform, the beliefs they never question, the constant movement that masks an inner stillness they haven't touched. He no longer envies what others call connection, because he understands the cost it often demands: agreement, performance, conformity, and he won't trade truth for the comfort of fitting in. Still, there's a part of him that remembers, a part that quietly hopes, not for crowds, not for company, but for someone awake, someone who has seen what he's seen, felt what he's felt, someone who doesn't need him to be smaller, quieter, or more agreeable in order to feel safe. That kind of meeting is rare. It can't be forced, and he would rather wait in silence than pretend in conversation. So he walks alone, not because he enjoys being apart, but because in a world still dreaming, authenticity is more valuable than acceptance. At some point, the solitude stops feeling unusual. It becomes normal, not empty, just quiet. He no longer interprets distance as a problem to solve. He sees it for what it is, the natural result of no longer pretending. While others surround themselves with noise, he has learned to live in stillness. While many chase attention, he moves without asking to be seen. People often assume he must feel lonely, as if company, any company, is always better than walking alone. But they confuse isolation with absence. He is not absent. He is simply no longer performing. He has come to prefer the space that honesty creates over the closeness that illusion demands. This is the final shift. He doesn't need the world to wake up for him to feel whole. He doesn't need agreement to feel clear. And he doesn't need validation to know who he is. He walks alone, yes, but not as an outsider, as a man at peace with the cost of truth. You know, it's a curious thing. Most people think that faith means believing in something. That to have faith, you must hold firmly to certain ideas, certain dogmas, certain statements about God, the universe, and your place in it. But I want to suggest to you that this is precisely not what faith is. In fact, the person who clings most tightly to belief may have the least faith of all. Faith is not clinging. It is not holding on. It is not gripping desperately to ideas like a man drowning, trying to clutch the water as if it were solid. Faith is letting go. When you swim, you don't grab hold of the water. You trust yourself to it. You float because you relax. You let the water support you. And the moment you stiffen, the moment you panic and try to grasp it, you sink. So too with faith. Faith is a state of openness, of trust in the process of life itself, of being carried by something vast, something immeasurable, something you cannot grasp or even define. But this is a frightening prospect for many. The mind desires security, and belief provides that. Belief wraps reality into tidy packages, gives names to the nameless, explanations to the inexplicable. But true faith, the faith that the great mystics speak of, begins where belief ends. It arises when we surrender the need to define, to control, to explain, and instead rest in the infinite mystery of what is. And so, let us walk together into this mystery, not to accumulate more beliefs, but perhaps to finally let them go. You see, what we are speaking about here is not merely a set of ideas, not a philosophy to be adopted, or a system of doctrines to be believed in. It is rather an experience, or more precisely, experiencing. Faith is something that operates deep in your being, in your bones, as it were, not simply in your mind. It's not an opinion you hold. It's not a conclusion you've reached. It's a way of being, of relating to the world. And curiously, much of Western religion has inverted this. In many traditions, particularly Christianity as it developed, enormous emphasis has been placed on correct belief. Do you accept the right dogmas, the right doctrines? Are you saying the right words about God? Because you are saved, not by works, but by faith. Yet ironically, that faith has often been reduced to mere belief, the mental acceptance of certain statements as true. But belief, in this sense, is fragile. It must be defended. It is always in danger of being contradicted, disproven, challenged. That is why belief often leads to fanaticism. Because it clings so tightly to its ideas, it fears anything that might threaten them. Faith, on the other hand, needs no defense. The one who truly has faith can afford to be open, flexible, even playful, because they trust the underlying process of life itself without needing to seize it in the net of concepts. To have faith is like falling backwards into infinite space, trusting that you will be caught, though you cannot see by whom or by what. Now, if faith is openness, if it is trust in the unfolding of life, then what about knowing God? That too has been gravely misunderstood. In many religious traditions, particularly in Christianity, they tell us that God can never truly be known, that the infinite cannot be grasped by the finite mind, that God, being ultimate, resists every attempt to capture him with thought. And yet, at the very same time, much energy has been spent debating what to believe about God. Endless arguments, councils, creeds, and declarations. Do you believe in the Trinity? Do you believe in the Incarnation? Do you believe in the virgin birth? But these are beliefs about God, not God. Very early on, the Christian Church rejected the movement called Gnosticism, a path that emphasized gnosis, or direct experiential knowledge of the divine. The Gnostics spoke of three types of people: the pneumatic, the spiritual ones; the psychic, the soul-centered ones; and the material ones concerned only with the world of things. Orthodox Christianity rejected this classification. Rightly so, perhaps, for spirit and matter need not be enemies. After all, the central miracle of Christianity is the Incarnation, that God became flesh, the infinite took form, the divine entered the world of the material. As St. Athanasius said, God became man that man might become God. And yet, you rarely hear that in church today. For many, the focus remains not on experiencing the divine directly, but on adhering to correct ideas about the divine. And this, you see, is the great tragedy of confusing belief with faith. In the mystical tradition, especially among Christian Neoplatonists, there is a beautiful paradox. The highest knowledge of God is a kind of unknowing. They called it agnosia, not ignorance, as we might assume, but a special kind of knowledge through unknowing. Dionysius the Areopagite, that mysterious figure of early Christian mysticism, taught that God is best known by stripping away all that we think we know. This is the path of negative theology, the via negativa. God is not one. Not even unity captures him. God is not spirit, not mind, not justice, not even love. For all these concepts fall short. The more you try to define God, the further away you move. For any concept, any image is less than God. If you see something and say, this is God, you have only seen a creature of God, an angel perhaps, but not God himself. The cloud of unknowing, as one medieval mystic called it, is where true faith lives. It is not a blankness. It is not a void. It is not the absence of thought in the sense of mere emptiness. No, it is a fullness too vast for any single thought to contain. And here the traditions of East and West meet, for the Hindus call this Nana, the same as Gnosis. The sages of India speak of it as neti, neti, not this, stripping away all concepts until only the mystery remains. In unknowing, we fall back into the infinite, not grasping, but surrendering. Not seeing God as an object, but as the very ground of all seeing. You see, when you explore deeply enough, the boundaries between traditions begin to dissolve. The Christians speak of the cloud of unknowing. The Hindus say neti neti, not this, not that. The Buddhists speak of sunyata, the great void, but all point toward the same mystery. The highest realization is not to escape the world, not to shut down the senses, not to sit in catatonic blankness. That is a profound misunderstanding. In some traditions, people imagine that enlightenment means sitting unmoving, deaf and blind to the world like a stone, as if ultimate wisdom were the absence of life itself. But no, the Chinese Zen master Huineng warned against this very error. To confuse emptiness with nothingness is to miss the point entirely. True emptiness, true sunyata, is not a void that excludes, but a space that includes all things without being stained by any of them. Space contains all stars, planets, and galaxies, yet remains perfectly empty. You cannot hammer a nail into space. You cannot spit on the sky and soil it. Your mind, your true nature, is like that space. It contains every thought, every feeling, every moment, but remains unstained. The Hindus call the ultimate state nirvikalpa samadhi, non-conceptual awareness. But this does not mean blankness. It means awareness, free from the chains of concepts, an openness so vast that nothing is excluded and nothing clings. This is not the emptiness of death. It is the fullness of life overflowing. And so we come to what may be the most beautiful paradox of all. The highest state of consciousness is not one that withdraws from life, but one that fully embraces it. If nirvana and samsara are truly one, as the Buddhists say, then the awakened one does not flee the world, but lives deeply within it. The Bodhisattva, the ideal figure of Mahayana Buddhism, is not wrapped in a trance, not hovering in some otherworldly bliss. No, he is here, fully present, fully engaged, moving through the world with the grace that comes from knowing there is nothing to fear. The spirit becomes flesh. The word becomes life. The infinite expresses itself through the finite. You see, if the highest reality were some exclusive state, some frozen, silent void, it would contradict itself. For what is truly infinite must leave nothing outside. The non-dual contains all opposites. It is not one, for one excludes many. It is not nothing, for nothing excludes something. It simply is, boundless, measureless, whole. Like space, no edge, no outside, no division. You may even glimpse it in the curious shape of a Klein bottle, a three-dimensional Mobius strip whose inside is outside and whose outside is inside, a surface that transcends our usual categories of inner and outer. This is how reality truly is. Seamless, continuous, undivided. The highest realization is not to escape life, but to see that you were never separate from it at all. Now you might ask, if the awakened one lives fully in the world, why do we speak so often of meditation? Why retreat? Why sit? Why the discipline? The practice? Meditation, you see, is not the goal. It is a medicine, not a diet. When you wish to open a door, you may pick up a brick to knock, but you do not carry the brick into the house. When you wish to cross a river, you build a raft, but you do not haul the raft on your back once you've reached the other shore. And yet, many become attached to the practices themselves. They confuse the raft for the destination. They turn the doorway into a revolving door, endlessly circling, never passing through. They say, "What a marvelous experience this meditation is." They become fascinated by the spinning, by the discipline itself, forgetting entirely that the whole point was to walk through into life itself. Spiritual practice can become a subtle form of spiritual vanity, a kind of religious one-upmanship. I meditate longer than you. I am more disciplined than you. I have experienced higher states than you. Be very careful of this. The purpose of meditation is to prepare the mind to release its grasping, to see through the illusion of separation, and finally to drop even the meditation itself. The awakened one walks freely, neither clinging to practices nor rejecting them, for he has seen that all tools are temporary. What matters is not the method, but the surrender. And now we arrive at the delightful heart of the matter. True faith is not grim, not serious in the sense of rigid solemnity. It is not a heavy burden to carry. It is rather a dance, a play, a cosmic joke of sorts. For you see, all the doctrines, all the beliefs, all the elaborate structures of theology, they are fingers pointing at the moon. And the tragedy is that people often stare at the finger, worship the finger, argue about the shape of the finger, and never see the moon. The one who truly has faith can laugh, because he knows deeply, viscerally, that he is not in control. He has let go of grasping. He falls backwards into infinite space, not knowing, not needing to know, but trusting utterly that the process of existence will catch him. In Zen they say, "Be kind to the crazy ones, for their souls are already with God." And perhaps in a certain sense, true faith is a kind of holy madness, the willingness to surrender control, to abandon certainty, to rejoice in not knowing. You see, there is a great secret game in spiritual circles, the game of seriousness, the game of importance, the game of being more enlightened than thou. A parasite is someone who keeps going through the revolving door, but only because someone else keeps giving it a push. But the one who walks right through, who leaves the door behind, who steps into the great mystery without the need to carry any tools, any labels, any beliefs, that one is free. That one is truly alive. And so, in the end, what is faith? It is not belief. It is not doctrine. It is not the fevered clinging to ideas that make us feel secure. Faith is surrender. It is the courage to release your grasp on life, to stop clutching, stop resisting, and simply allow. To trust the flow of existence the way you trust the water when you float, knowing it will carry you, though you cannot command it. To live in faith is to fall backwards into the arms of God, arms you cannot see, cannot define, cannot control, but which you know are always there. It is to awaken in the morning with no guarantee, no certainty, no assurance of what tomorrow will bring, and yet to breathe, to smile, to walk forward, knowing that you are already home. The great mystery is not something to be solved, it is something to be lived. You do not solve music. You play it, you dance with it, and so it is with life. Faith is not about having the answers, it is about being at peace without them. In the words of an old Zen master, when you walk, just walk. When you sit, just sit. Above all, don't wobble. That is faith. Everyone these days is talking about meditation, as if it were some peculiar skill, some extraordinary discipline that one must master, like playing the violin or learning mathematics. But the very moment you try to do it, you've already missed the point entirely. You cannot meditate, you simply cannot. The very attempt is already failure. For the simple reason that you, the ego, the thinker, the little voice inside your head, are the very obstruction to meditation itself. Thinking is nothing but a form of inner chatter, like talking to oneself. And as long as that chatter goes on, you remain trapped in a world of abstractions, a world of symbols about reality, rather than reality itself. You see, reality is not a thought, it's not a word, it's not a name. Reality is now. And this moment, this eternal present, cannot be grasped by the mind that seeks to capture it, because the mind can only represent, never experience directly. The trouble, you see, is that most people try to meditate by struggling with their own minds. They sit in their little postures, gritting their teeth, attempting to silence thought, to force tranquility. But that's like trying to smooth rough water with a flat iron. The harder you try, the more turbulent it becomes. No, you cannot meditate by effort. You can only allow meditation to happen. In the same way that you allow yourself to listen to the hum of the world, without trying to understand it, without naming, without grasping, just listen, just be. And in that effortless being, meditation arises on its own. You see, most people are simply addicted to thinking. That endless chattering inside your skull, words, symbols, images, it never stops. And it is quite literally talking to yourself. Now, if you talk all the time, you never hear what anyone else has to say. And if you think all the time, you never allow yourself to encounter what is real. All you have are your own thoughts about reality, which are merely representations, not reality itself. You live, as it were, inside a map, mistaking it for the territory. Inside a world of symbols that refer to things, but are not the things themselves. You see a tree, and you call it tree. But the word tree is not the living, rustling, swaying reality out there. It's only a noise, a convenient label. This is the basic illusion. The mind constantly labeling separates you from what is. It creates a gap, a gulf between the observer and the observed, between the knower and the known. And in that gap you feel alienated. You feel alone, cut off from the universe that you are actually inseparable from. You see, it's rather curious. We live in this constant attempt to describe, to name, to control. But reality does not need your commentary. It simply is. And when you are endlessly thinking, you're living in a kind of dream world, never directly touching life, but merely talking to yourself about it. This, you see, is the first great obstacle to meditation. As long as this internal chatter continues, you remain a spectator of your own illusions, never a participant in the living moment. Now, what is reality? That's a very peculiar question, because the moment you ask it, you've already moved away from it. You see, reality is not something that can be captured by thought, by language, or by any form of conceptualization. The moment you name it, you reduce it. Words divide, categorize, create boundaries where none exist. The real world is not made of things or events. Those are inventions of the mind. Out there, it's all just happening. A marvelous system of wiggles and flows, endlessly dancing. Take the stars, for instance. We look at the sky and say, here are constellations. But the stars aren't grouped together in the sky. That grouping exists only in your mind. The divisions, the patterns, all are projections of your own symbolic system. Reality itself makes no such distinctions. In truth, there is no ultimate difference between yourself and what you call the external world. The idea that I am something inside this bag of skin, separate from everything else, is simply an illusion, a convention, for you are as much the sunlight as you are the eyes that perceive it. You are as much the air that fills your lungs as the breath that moves within you. But the ego insists on this division. Here I am, and there is the world. This separation is at the root of our anxiety, our conflict, our search for control. But reality, the real reality, is utterly free of all this. It is neither spiritual nor material. It is not this or that. It simply is. And the moment you stop trying to grasp it, to define it, you begin to taste it. Now let us speak of this thing called the ego, the I, the separate self that most people imagine themselves to be. The ego, you see, is not a thing. It's not some entity hiding inside your head, pulling the levers. The ego is a social convention, a hallucination created by your thinking. It is the thought of I. And when you examine it carefully, you find that it has no substance of its own. It is simply a pattern of tension, a continuous effort of identification and control. When you think, you create the image of a thinker behind the thoughts. When you feel, you create the idea of a feeler behind the feelings. But these are only ideas. Thoughts do not require a thinker, any more than lightning requires someone to operate the thunder. Thoughts arise spontaneously. They happen as clouds form in the sky. The problem arises when we identify with this abstraction. That is, when we believe that the ego is real, solid, permanent, and this identification creates conflict. It creates fear. It creates the desperate urge to control, to improve, to protect something that in truth has no independent existence. The tragedy is that the ego is precisely what tries to meditate, and that's the great joke of it all. The very thing that wants to let go cannot let go. The ego cannot surrender, because surrender would be its own dissolution. You see, meditation cannot be done by the ego. The moment you approach meditation as something you must do, you are reinforcing the very illusion that must evaporate. Meditation is not something you achieve. It is something that happens when the ego exhausts itself and falls silent. Here is where so many go astray. They sit down to meditate, with furrowed brows, tense jaws, and anxious minds, determined to still their thoughts, to silence the inner noise. But, you see, this very act of trying is itself the noise. To try to meditate is like trying to smooth a rough pond with a flat iron. The more you press, the more ripples you create. The water would settle perfectly well on its own if only you would leave it alone. So too with the mind. People imagine that meditation means the absence of thought, that a blank mind is the goal. But thoughts, you see, are no more a problem than the chirping of birds or the passing of traffic outside your window. They are simply happenings, part of the great orchestration of life. You don't need to suppress them. You don't need to resist them. You simply observe. As you would listen to the wind or watch leaves flutter, you allow the thoughts to come and go without judgment, without grasping, without naming. Meditation happens naturally when you stop interfering. When you stop trying to meditate, you are meditating. It's a paradox, you see. The ego wants to be the master, to be in control even of its own surrender. But surrender is not something the ego can perform. It is what arises when the ego dissolves. Therefore, let go of the effort. Let the mind be as it is. And like a tired bird that eventually quiets its song, your thoughts too will settle when left undisturbed. Meditation is the art of non-doing, the grace of being. So then, if meditation is not a practice of doing, what is it? It is simply being present with what is, without the compulsion to alter, to judge, or to fix. It is, in essence, a profound listening. You close your eyes and allow the world to pour into you. You hear the faint hum of distant traffic, the whisper of the breeze, the gentle beating of your own heart. And you do not name these sounds. You do not categorize them. You simply receive them. You let your senses play freely, without interference from the mind's commentary. You allow your breath to breathe itself, without control, without manipulation. You let your body exist as it is, aches, tensions, sensations, without trying to improve or resist any of it. This is the art of non-doing. You are not forcing anything, not aiming for any particular state. You're not trying to achieve tranquility or enlightenment or bliss. You're simply allowing. And in this allowing, something remarkable happens. The boundary between self and world begins to soften. The rigid lines dissolve. You no longer feel like a separate observer watching life from behind your eyes. You become instead part of the happening itself. The breath, the sounds, the thoughts, all part of one continuous process. In this you rediscover your original nature, effortless, spontaneous, free. You are not a fragment trapped in a skin bag called me, but rather a manifestation of the whole universe, a wave upon the vast ocean of being. Meditation, you see, is not a task to master, but a mystery to sink into. It is the effortless grace of simply being here now without trying to be anywhere else. Now, one of the simplest and most beautiful ways to slip into this effortless state is through the act of listening. Not listening for something, not listening to identify, but simply listening. You see, sound is marvelous because it requires nothing of you. The world is full of sounds, and they are happening whether you participate or not. The cars passing, the wind through the trees, the rustle of your own breath, all of it is there. And if you allow your ears to open, simply open, you begin to hear these sounds not as distractions, not as separate incidents, but as one continuous symphony. You do not label them. That's a bird. That's a car horn. That's my stomach rumbling. No, you allow sound to be pure vibration. You listen as you would listen to music, not analyzing but receiving. And if you find yourself thinking, which you will, you listen to your thoughts as though they too are sounds. A kind of interior humming, like birds twittering outside your window. You neither suppress nor indulge them. You let them come and you let them go. In this act of listening without grasping, without commentary, you fall effortlessly into meditation. The mind no longer struggles. The ego, which always wants to understand, to control, to manipulate, finds nothing to cling to, and slowly, quietly it dissolves. You discover in this listening that you are not a separate listener, standing apart from the world. You are simply part of the vibration. The ears and the sound are one process. Meditation happens when you listen, not to achieve silence, but to hear the music of existence itself. Breathing holds a profound secret. Most take it entirely for granted. After all, it happens continuously, day and night, without conscious effort. Yet, at any moment, you can decide to alter it, to hold your breath, to breathe deeply, to quicken or slow the rhythm. It exists in a strange borderland, both under your control and entirely independent of it. This peculiar nature of breath offers a glimpse into the artificial distinction between what we call self and what we call world. Ordinarily, there is a firm division in the mind. On one side, things I do. On the other, things that happen to me. But breathing unsettles that neat separation. Am I breathing? Or is breathing happening? The more attentively you observe this rhythm, the more that old division begins to blur. Breathing is not an isolated act performed by a little me inside a body. It is part of a much larger process. The air entering your lungs was stirred by the trees. The oxygen carried into your bloodstream was once part of a great atmospheric dance involving oceans, forests, and sunlit skies. Breathing is participation in a cosmic circulation. This realization extends beyond respiration. Your entire organism, the beating of your heart, the movement of your digestion, even the involuntary twitches of your muscles, operates as an intricate system that never once asked for your permission. The thought that you are in control is only a narrow spotlight of conscious attention, scanning the vast mystery of your existence. Here lies one of the great revelations of meditation. As you simply watch your breath, neither guiding it nor interfering, the understanding arises that the apparent boundary between what I am doing and what is happening to me is arbitrary. The breath breathes itself, and in that effortless flow, the illusion of a separate controller begins to dissolve. This is not a philosophical abstraction. It is something directly experienced when attention settles into stillness. Watching the breath without interfering is a mirror for life itself. Life moves through you. The heart beats, the lungs fill, sensations arise. None of these require your effort. And in that effortless happening, there is no solid I pulling the strings, only the continuous dance of existence. As this understanding deepens, meditation ceases to be a practice of control. It becomes a surrender to what has always been unfolding without your grasp. People are always trying to get somewhere. They imagine that life is a kind of journey, a long road leading towards some final destination. Enlightenment, success, salvation, or ultimate happiness. But this entire way of thinking is built on a fundamental misunderstanding. In music, the purpose is not to reach the end of the composition. If that were so, the finest musicians would be those who played the fastest. The meaning of music is in the playing itself, the unfolding of each note, each pause, each crescendo. The joy of music is not in arriving, but in the movement, the flowing patterns of sound. The same is true of dancing. No one dances to arrive at a particular spot on the floor. If that were the purpose, people would simply choose the shortest route and stand still. The dance exists entirely for its own sake. The movement is the meaning. But most approach life as though it were a race, as though everything exists for the sake of arriving somewhere better, somewhere else. This striving keeps them perpetually unsatisfied, forever chasing a future that never arrives. For tomorrow is always one day away, and the horizon recedes as you approach it. In truth, life is much more like dancing than like traveling. Every moment is complete in itself. Every experience is the point. The striving itself creates the illusion of incompleteness. The moment one imagines there is something to attain, one steps out of the flow of life and becomes anxious, restless, disconnected. Meditation reveals this directly. When you sit quietly, not chasing thoughts, not grasping for results, you discover that the present moment is entirely sufficient. There is nowhere to go, nothing to achieve. The now contains everything. This is why genuine meditation has no goal. The ego, always concerned with improvement, demands progress. It wants to meditate, to become wiser, more peaceful, more enlightened. But this desire is rooted in the illusion of becoming, of movement toward an imagined end. In stillness, it becomes clear you are already here. There is no elsewhere. Life is not a path. It is a rhythm, not a pursuit, but a play. And when this is seen, the weight of striving lifts, replaced by the simple joy of being present, fully engaged in the dance of existence. For most, the great fear beneath all fears is death. The notion of slipping into eternal nothingness, of being extinguished like a candle flame. The mind conjures the terrifying image of an endless darkness, a vast emptiness where no experience remains. But this fear is built upon a false premise, that there exists a solid, separate I that can be lost. Ask yourself, where were you before you were born? Can you recall any sense of non-existence? Of course not. There was no awareness of absence, just as you have no awareness of the inner workings of your liver or the turning of the planets. And they happen without your knowing, without your effort. When you imagine death, you project the idea of continued awareness into a state where awareness itself is absent. But non-existence is not an experience you can have. You do not experience being dead, any more than you experienced not yet being born. Consider sleep. When deep in dreamless sleep, where does you go? There is no fear, no longing, no pain, only an absence of differentiation. Then you awaken, and the world appears again as if summoned into being. But in truth, the world was never separate from you. Birth and death are not absolute boundaries, but movements in a continuous flow. Just as waves rise and fall upon the ocean, each being emerges and dissolves back into the great totality. The wave was never separate from the ocean. It was always water, always part of the larger movement. This sense of separation, of being a distinct, isolated entity navigating a foreign world, is the root of suffering. The ego insists on its independence, but this independence is an illusion maintained by thought. When thought quiets, the illusion dissolves, and what remains is unity. In the deepest silence, one sees that life and death are not opposites, but complements, part of a single process without beginning or end. The universe breathes in beings and breathes them out again. Each birth is not a new other arriving, but another face of the same underlying reality. When this is understood not as an idea, but directly felt, death loses its sting. The fear of annihilation melts away, replaced by the quiet wonder of being part of an eternal, unbroken whole. Nothing has been gained or lost. There is only this endless, marvelous happening. The essence of meditation, indeed, of all wisdom, lies in letting go. Not as a technique, not as something you must do, but as the natural result of understanding the impossibility of control. From childhood, we are taught to grasp, to hold tightly, to seek security, mastery, and permanence. The mind clings to ideas, to possessions, to identities. The ego constructs its fortress of me and mine, always vigilant, always tense. But the harder one holds, the more fragile it becomes. Letting go is not an act of sacrifice. It is not resignation or defeat. It is liberation from an impossible task, the futile effort to control what was never truly yours to manage. Life moves of its own accord. Thoughts arise unbidden. Sensations fluctuate. Circumstances shift without consultation. The world dances freely, and you were never its master. Meditation reveals this by allowing everything to be as it is. Thoughts wander. Emotions stir. Sounds fill the space. Yet none of it requires your interference. The breath breathes itself. The heart beats on. The world continues to turn. And as this truth deepens, the compulsion to manage every detail slowly dissolves. True freedom emerges not from domination, but from participation, from becoming part of the flow rather than standing apart from it. The separation between self and world softens until the boundary disappears altogether. When the grip of control loosens, something remarkable is discovered, a profound harmony beneath the apparent chaos. Even conflicts, pains, and losses reveal their place in the greater rhythm. The so-called discord of life is simply the necessary contrast that gives rise to the beauty of the whole, like shadows defining light, or silence defining music. This is why the great traditions speak of enlightenment not as an attainment, but as a return to what was always present, hidden beneath the restless grasping of thought. It is the simple recognition that you are already home, already part of the totality, that requires no improvement. In letting go, the heavy burden of self dissolves. There is no longer anyone struggling to meditate, no one seeking to arrive. There is only the effortless grace of being utterly complete, profoundly free. And so, at last, we come full circle. The great misunderstanding is that meditation is a tool, a means by which one might become more peaceful, more enlightened, more successful, or somehow more perfected. This is the language of striving, the subtle whisper of the ego still plotting its escape, still seeking to improve itself, as though it were a flawed machine in need of repair. But meditation, in its truest form, has nothing to do with self-improvement. It is not a ladder one climbs. It is not a technique to acquire control or mastery. The very impulse to get better is precisely what keeps one trapped in restlessness. The truth is wonderfully simple. There is nothing to attain. There never was. The search itself is the obstacle. The striving is the suffering. The illusion is the idea that this moment, just as it is, could somehow be incomplete. Meditation is simply allowing life to be exactly as it is, without resistance. It is not a practice of becoming, but of dissolving. Dissolving the illusion of the separate self, dissolving the clinging mind that forever chases a better future. When that dissolves, what remains is the present, not as a concept, not as a moment in time, but as the timeless reality of being. This is why it has been said, when you stop trying to meditate, meditation happens. Not because you have achieved something, but because you have relinquished the effort. The silence was always there, beneath the noise of grasping. Life is not a problem to be solved, nor a journey to be completed. It is music to be heard, a dance to be danced. An unfolding that requires no purpose beyond itself. And in this very moment, as you sit, as you breathe, as sounds arise and fade, meditation is already occurring. No effort is necessary. No attainment is waiting. There is only this. The play of existence continues. And you, like a wave upon the sea, are part of its endless, effortless rhythm. gap, a gulf between the observer. Everyone these days is talking about meditation, as if it were some peculiar skill, some extraordinary discipline that one must master, like playing the violin or learning mathematics. But the very moment you try to do it, you've already missed the point entirely. You cannot meditate, you simply cannot. The very attempt is already failure. For the simple reason that you, the ego, the thinker, the little voice inside your head, are the very obstruction to meditation itself. Thinking is nothing but a form of inner chatter, like talking to oneself. And as long as that chatter goes on, you remain trapped in a world of abstractions, a world of symbols about reality, rather than reality itself. You see, reality is not a thought, it's not a word, it's not a name. Reality is now. And this moment, this eternal present, cannot be grasped by the mind that seeks to capture it, because the mind can only represent, never experience directly. The trouble, you see, is that most people try to meditate by struggling with their own minds. They sit in their little postures, gritting their teeth, attempting to silence thought, to force tranquility. But that's like trying to smooth rough water with a flat iron. The harder you try, the more turbulent it becomes. No, you cannot meditate by effort. You can only allow meditation to happen. In the same way that you allow yourself to listen to the hum of the world, without trying to understand it, without naming, without grasping, just listen, just be. And in that effortless being, meditation arises on its own. You see, most people are simply addicted to thinking. That endless chattering inside your skull, words, symbols, images, it never stops. And it is quite literally talking to yourself. Now, if you talk all the time, you never hear what anyone else has to say. And if you think all the time, you never allow yourself to encounter what is real. All you have are your own thoughts about reality, which are merely representations, not reality itself. You live, as it were, inside a map, mistaking it for the territory. Inside a world of symbols that refer to things, but are not the things themselves. You see a tree, and you call it tree. But the word tree is not the living, rustling, swaying reality out there. It's only a noise, a convenient label. This is the basic illusion. The mind constantly labeling separates you from what is. It creates a gap, a gulf between the observer and the observed, between the knower and the known. And in that gap you feel alienated. You feel alone, cut off from the universe that you are actually inseparable from. You see, it's rather curious. We live in this constant attempt to describe, to name, to control. But reality does not need your commentary. It simply is. And when you are endlessly thinking, you're living in a kind of dream world, never directly touching life, but merely talking to yourself about it. This, you see, is the first great obstacle to meditation. As long as this internal chatter continues, you remain a spectator of your own illusions, never a participant in the living moment. Now, what is reality? That's a very peculiar question, because the moment you ask it, you've already moved away from it. You see, reality is not something that can be captured by thought, by language, or by any form of conceptualization. The moment you name it, you reduce it. Words divide, categorize, create boundaries where none exist. The real world is not made of things or events. Those are inventions of the mind. Out there, it's all just happening. A marvelous system of wiggles and flows, endlessly dancing. Take the stars, for instance. We look at the sky and say, here are constellations. But the stars aren't grouped together in the sky. That grouping exists only in your mind. The divisions, the patterns, all are projections of your own symbolic system. Reality itself makes no such distinctions. In truth, there is no ultimate difference between yourself and what you call the external world. The idea that I am something inside this bag of skin, separate from everything else, is simply an illusion, a convention, for you are as much the sunlight as you are the eyes that perceive it. You are as much the air that fills your lungs as the breath that moves within you. But the ego insists on this division. Here I am, and there is the world. This separation is at the root of our anxiety, our conflict, our search for control. But reality, the real reality, is utterly free of all this. It is neither spiritual nor material. It is not this or that. It simply is. And the moment you stop trying to grasp it, to define it, you begin to taste it. Now let us speak of this thing called the ego, the I, the separate self that most people imagine themselves to be. The ego, you see, is not a thing. It's not some entity hiding inside your head, pulling the levers. The ego is a social convention, a hallucination created by your thinking. It is the thought of I. And when you examine it carefully, you find that it has no substance of its own. It is simply a pattern of tension, a continuous effort of identification and control. When you think, you create the image of a thinker behind the thoughts. When you feel, you create the idea of a feeler behind the feelings. But these are only ideas. Thoughts do not require a thinker, any more than lightning requires someone to operate the thunder. Thoughts arise spontaneously. They happen as clouds form in the sky. The problem arises when we identify with this abstraction. That is, when we believe that the ego is real, solid, permanent, and this identification creates conflict. It creates fear. It creates the desperate urge to control, to improve, to protect something that in truth has no independent existence. The tragedy is that the ego is precisely what tries to meditate, and that's the great joke of it all. The very thing that wants to let go cannot let go. The ego cannot surrender, because surrender would be its own dissolution. You see, meditation cannot be done by the ego. The moment you approach meditation as something you must do, you are reinforcing the very illusion that must evaporate. Meditation is not something you achieve. It is something that happens when the ego exhausts itself and falls silent. Here is where so many go astray. They sit down to meditate, with furrowed brows, tense jaws, and anxious minds, determined to still their thoughts, to silence the inner noise. But, you see, this very act of trying is itself the noise. To try to meditate is like trying to smooth a rough pond with a flat iron. The more you press, the more ripples you create. The water would settle perfectly well on its own if only you would leave it alone. So too with the mind. People imagine that meditation means the absence of thought, that a blank mind is the goal. But thoughts, you see, are no more a problem than the chirping of birds or the passing of traffic outside your window. They are simply happenings, part of the great orchestration of life. You don't need to suppress them. You don't need to resist them. You simply observe. As you would listen to the wind or watch leaves flutter, you allow the thoughts to come and go without judgment, without grasping, without naming. Meditation happens naturally when you stop interfering. When you stop trying to meditate, you are meditating. It's a paradox, you see. The ego wants to be the master, to be in control even of its own surrender. But surrender is not something the ego can perform. It is what arises when the ego dissolves. Therefore, let go of the effort. Let the mind be as it is. And like a tired bird that eventually quiets its song, your thoughts too will settle when left undisturbed. Meditation is the art of non-doing, the grace of being. So then, if meditation is not a practice of doing, what is it? It is simply being present with what is, without the compulsion to alter, to judge, or to fix. It is in essence a profound listening. You close your eyes and allow the world to pour into you. You hear the faint hum of distant traffic, the whisper of the breeze, the gentle beating of your own heart. And you do not name these sounds. You do not categorize them. You simply receive them. You let your senses play freely, without interference from the mind's commentary. You allow your breath to breathe itself, without control, without manipulation. You let your body exist as it is, aches, tensions, sensations, without trying to improve or resist any of it. This is the art of non-doing. You are not forcing anything, not aiming for any particular state. You're not trying to achieve tranquility or enlightenment or bliss. You're simply allowing. And in this allowing, something remarkable happens. The boundary between self and world begins to soften. The rigid lines dissolve. You no longer feel like a separate observer watching life from behind your eyes. You become instead part of the happening itself. The breath, the sounds, the thoughts, all part of one continuous process. In this you rediscover your original nature, effortless, spontaneous, free. You are not a fragment trapped in a skin bag called me, but rather a manifestation of the whole universe, a wave upon the vast ocean of being. Meditation, you see, is not a task to master, but a mystery to sink into. It is the effortless grace of simply being here now without trying to be anywhere else. Now, one of the simplest and most beautiful ways to slip into this effortless state is through the act of listening. Not listening for something, not listening to identify, but simply listening. You see, sound is marvelous because it requires nothing of you. The world is full of sounds, and they are happening whether you participate or not. The cars passing, the wind through the trees, the rustle of your own breath, all of it is there. And if you allow your ears to open, simply open, you begin to hear these sounds not as distractions, not as separate incidents, but as one continuous symphony. You do not label them. That's a bird. That's a car horn. That's my stomach rumbling. No, you allow sound to be pure vibration. You listen as you would listen to music, not analyzing but receiving. And if you find yourself thinking, which you will, you listen to your thoughts as though they too are sounds. A kind of interior humming, like birds twittering outside your window. You neither suppress nor indulge them. You let them come and you let them go. In this act of listening without grasping, without commentary, you fall effortlessly into meditation. The mind no longer struggles. The ego, which always wants to understand, to control, to manipulate, finds nothing to cling to, and slowly, quietly, it dissolves. You discover in this listening that you are not a separate listener, standing apart from the world. You are simply part of the vibration. The ears and the sound are one process. Meditation happens when you listen, not to achieve silence, but to hear the music of existence itself. Breathing holds a profound secret. Most take it entirely for granted. After all, it happens continuously, day and night, without conscious effort. Yet, at any moment, you can decide to alter it, to hold your breath, to breathe deeply, to quicken or slow the rhythm. It exists in a strange borderland, both under your control and entirely independent of it. This peculiar nature of breath offers a glimpse into the artificial distinction between what we call self and what we call world. Ordinarily, there is a firm division in the mind. On one side, things I do. On the other, things that happen to me. But breathing unsettles that neat separation. Am I breathing? Or is breathing happening? The more attentively you observe this rhythm, the more that old division begins to blur. Breathing is not an isolated act performed by a little me inside a body. It is part of a much larger process. The air entering your lungs was stirred by the trees. The oxygen carried into your bloodstream was once part of a great atmospheric dance involving oceans, forests, and sunlit skies. Breathing is participation in a cosmic circulation. This realization extends beyond respiration. Your entire organism, the beating of your heart, the movement of your digestion, even the involuntary twitches of your muscles, operates as an intricate system that never once asked for your permission. The thought that you are in control is only a narrow spotlight of conscious attention, scanning the vast mystery of your existence. Here lies one of the great revelations of meditation. As you simply watch your breath, neither guiding it nor interfering, the understanding arises that the apparent boundary between what I am doing and what is happening to me is arbitrary. The breath breathes itself, and in that effortless flow, the illusion of a separate controller begins to dissolve. This is not a philosophical abstraction. It is something directly experienced when attention settles into stillness. Watching the breath without interfering is a mirror for life itself. Life moves through you. The heart beats, the lungs fill, sensations arise. None of these require your effort. And in that effortless happening, there is no solid I pulling the strings, only the continuous dance of existence. As this understanding deepens, meditation ceases to be a practice of control. It becomes a surrender to what has always been unfolding without your grasp. People are always trying to get somewhere. They imagine that life is a kind of journey, a long road leading towards some final destination. Enlightenment, success, salvation, or ultimate happiness. But this entire way of thinking is built on a fundamental misunderstanding. In music, the purpose is not to reach the end of the composition. If that were so, the finest musicians would be those who played the fastest. The meaning of music is in the playing itself, the unfolding of each note, each pause, each crescendo. The joy of music is not in arriving, but in the movement, the flowing patterns of sound. The same is true of dancing. No one dances to arrive at a particular spot on the floor. If that were the purpose, people would simply choose the shortest route and stand still. The dance exists entirely for its own sake. The movement is the meaning. But most approach life as though it were a race, as though everything exists for the sake of arriving somewhere better, somewhere else. This striving keeps them perpetually unsatisfied, forever chasing a future that never arrives. For tomorrow is always one day away, and the horizon recedes as you approach it. In truth, life is much more like dancing than like traveling. Every moment is complete in itself. Every experience is the point. The striving itself creates the illusion of incompleteness. The moment one imagines there is something to attain, one steps out of the flow of life and becomes anxious, restless, disconnected. Meditation reveals this directly. When you sit quietly, not chasing thoughts, not grasping for results, you discover that the present moment is entirely sufficient. There is nowhere to go, nothing to achieve. The now contains everything. This is why genuine meditation has no goal. The ego, always concerned with improvement, demands progress. It wants to meditate, to become wiser, more peaceful, more enlightened. But this desire is rooted in the illusion of becoming, of movement toward an imagined end. In stillness, it becomes clear you are already here. There is no elsewhere. Life is not a path. It is a rhythm, not a pursuit, but a play. And when this is seen, the weight of striving lifts, replaced by the simple joy of being present, fully engaged in the dance of existence. For most, the great fear beneath all fears is death. The notion of slipping into eternal nothingness, of being extinguished like a candle flame. The mind conjures the terrifying image of an endless darkness, a vast emptiness where no experience remains. But this fear is built upon a false premise, that there exists a solid, separate I that can be lost. Ask yourself, where were you before you were born? Can you recall any sense of non-existence? Of course not. There was no awareness of absence, just as you have no awareness of the inner workings of your liver or the turning of the planets. And they happen without your knowing, without your effort. When you imagine death, you project the idea of continued awareness into a state where awareness itself is absent. But non-existence is not an experience you can have. You do not experience being dead, any more than you experienced not yet being born. Consider sleep. When deep in dreamless sleep, where does you go? There is no fear, no longing, no pain, only an absence of differentiation. Then you awaken, and the world appears again, as if summoned into being. But in truth, the world was never separate from you. Birth and death are not absolute boundaries, but movements in a continuous flow. Just as waves rise and fall upon the ocean, each being emerges and dissolves back into the great totality. The wave was never separate from the ocean. It was always water, always part of the larger movement. This sense of separation, of being a distinct, isolated entity navigating a foreign world, is the root of suffering. The ego insists on its independence, but this independence is an illusion maintained by thought. When thought quiets, the illusion dissolves, and what remains is unity. In the deepest silence, one sees that life and death are not opposites, but complements, part of a single process without beginning or end. The universe breathes in beings and breathes them out again. Each birth is not a new other arriving, but another face of the same underlying reality. When this is understood not as an idea, but directly felt, death loses its sting. The fear of annihilation melts away, replaced by the quiet wonder of being part of an eternal, unbroken whole. Nothing has been gained or lost. There is only this endless, marvelous happening. The essence of meditation, indeed, of all wisdom, lies in letting go. Not as a technique, not as something you must do, but as the natural result of understanding the impossibility of control. From childhood, we are taught to grasp, to hold tightly, to seek security, mastery, and permanence. The mind clings to ideas, to possessions, to identities. The ego constructs its fortress of me and mine, always vigilant, always tense. But the harder one holds, the more fragile it becomes. Letting go is not an act of sacrifice. It is not resignation or defeat. It is liberation from an impossible task, the futile effort to control what was never truly yours to manage. Life moves of its own accord. Thoughts arise unbidden. Sensations fluctuate. Circumstances shift without consultation. The world dances freely, and you were never its master. Meditation reveals this by allowing everything to be as it is. Thoughts wander. Emotions stir. Sounds fill the space. Yet none of it requires your interference. The breath breathes itself. The heart beats on. The world continues to turn. And as this truth deepens, the compulsion to manage every detail slowly dissolves. True freedom emerges not from domination, but from participation, from becoming part of the flow rather than standing apart from it. The separation between self and world softens until the boundary disappears altogether. When the grip of control loosens, something remarkable is discovered, a profound harmony beneath the apparent chaos. Even conflicts, pains, and losses reveal their place in the greater rhythm. The so-called discord of life is simply the necessary contrast that gives rise to the beauty of the whole, like shadows defining light, or silence defining music. This is why the great traditions speak of enlightenment not as an attainment, but as a return to what was always present, hidden beneath the restless grasping of thought. It is the simple recognition that you are already home, already part of the totality, that requires no improvement. In letting go, the heavy burden of self dissolves. There is no longer anyone struggling to meditate, no one seeking to arrive. There is only the effortless grace of being utterly complete, profoundly free. And so, at last, we come full circle. The great misunderstanding is that meditation is a tool, a means by which one might become more peaceful, more enlightened, more successful, or somehow more perfected. This is the language of striving, the subtle whisper of the ego still plotting its escape, still seeking to improve itself, as though it were a flawed machine in need of repair. But meditation, in its truest form, has nothing to do with self-improvement. It is not a ladder one climbs. It is not a technique to acquire control or mastery. The very impulse to get better is precisely what keeps one trapped in restlessness. The truth is wonderfully simple. There is nothing to attain. There never was. The search itself is the obstacle. The striving is the suffering. The illusion is the idea that this moment, just as it is, could somehow be incomplete. Meditation is simply allowing life to be exactly as it is, without resistance. It is not a practice of becoming, but of dissolving. Dissolving the illusion of the separate self, dissolving the clinging mind that forever chases a better future. When that dissolves, what remains is the present, not as a concept, not as a moment in time, but as the timeless reality of being. This is why it has been said, when you stop trying to meditate, meditation happens. Not because you have achieved something, but because you have relinquished the effort. The silence was always there, beneath the noise of grasping. Life is not a problem to be solved, nor a journey to be completed. It is music to be heard, a dance to be danced. An unfolding that requires no purpose beyond itself. And in this very moment, as you sit, as you breathe, as sounds arise and fade, meditation is already occurring. No effort is necessary. No attainment is waiting. There is only this. The play of existence continues. And you, like a wave upon the sea, are part of its endless, effortless rhythm. You see, it's a curious thing that we say falling in love. We don't say rising into love. That would suggest effort, achievement, a sort of conquest. But falling, now that tells you something deeper. There's the sense of the ground giving way beneath you, of losing your balance. And we don't much care for that, do we? The whole business of being a proper, sensible individual is to be in control, upright, watchful, secure. So to fall in love, to truly fall, is in a way to go mad. Not the kind of madness you lock away in asylums, no, but a sort of unreasonableness, a letting go of the usual caution. It is, in a very real sense, a risk, a gamble, because you see, love, real love is not safe. It does not come with guarantees. It doesn't say, if you love me, I'll behave a certain way. No, it strikes like lightning. You don't know how or why. It just comes. And you are changed. And that change, well, it's a sort of death, isn't it? The death of the ego. The collapse of that little fortress you've been guarding. And that's why people resist it. For life itself is always a risk. Every step you take is taken on faith. You walk, but you do not know that the floor will hold. You speak, but you cannot be sure the words will land. And yet you walk, and you speak, you live, because something in you trusts the process. So too with love. To fall in love is to give yourself over to something you cannot understand, to allow yourself to be touched, moved, and altered. And it's quite mad. But that madness is precisely what makes it sane. To resist it, to say, no, I must remain upright and unaffected, is to deny the most essential part of being alive. For love, like life, is a risk, a gamble. Every step we take, every path we follow, we walk by faith, not by certainty. When you fall in love, you are saying, I am willing to surrender, to give myself up into the unknown. And that is the boldest thing a human being can do. Now let us look more closely at this idea of surrender, because it's central to love. Love is not a matter of control. In fact, it's the very opposite. It is an act of surrender to another person, a giving of oneself completely, without reservation. Not because you are being noble or self-sacrificing, no, but because it's the only thing that can actually work. You see, all the sensible people in the world are busy holding on, watching their step, managing outcomes. And the more they hold on, the tighter they grasp, the less alive they become. But the person in love, they let go. They say, here I am, take me, do as you will. And of course that sounds outrageous. People say, you can't do that, you'll get hurt. Yes, yes, you might. But the alternative is to never love at all, to stay locked in yourself, untouched and untouchable. And that, you see, is the real tragedy. Because when you try to protect yourself from love, you also shut yourself off from life. You cannot say, I want to experience the fullness of life, but I don't want any surprises. It doesn't work like that. Life and love are of the same fabric, they move in uncertainty. And it is only when you move with them instead of against them that you begin to understand. So we must understand that love is not sensible. It's not a matter of policy. You don't enter into it like a contract, I'll love you if you meet my conditions. That isn't love. That's an arrangement. And yet, so many people go about it that way. They say, I must find the perfect partner, the one who completes me, fulfills me, understands me entirely. But such expectations are bound to disappoint, for no one can complete you. And if you are not whole to begin with, you will only make a demand out of your love, a sort of bargain, a transaction dressed up in tenderness. But love, real love, is not a bargain, it is a letting go. And that, I say, is the highest wisdom. To give yourself without knowing what will come of it, to say yes to uncertainty, to walk into the forest, not knowing the path, that is love. And if it seems mad, well, then let it be mad. Because the world that pretends to be sane, to be orderly and proper, that's the world, on the edge of blowing itself to bits. So perhaps it is the lovers, the ones who are willing to fall, who are in the end the only truly sane ones. Now, all our institutions, our churches, our schools, our governments are built around the idea of control, of watching, guarding, keeping everything in tidy lines. But love mocks these lines. It flows beyond them, around them, dissolves them altogether, and so most people are terrified of it, because to love, truly, is to allow yourself to be undone. You see, the ego, that brittle sense of me, cannot survive love. It vanishes like a shadow in sunlight. And this is precisely what makes love feel dangerous to the unprepared. It threatens their identity, their story, their narrative of self. And so they resist, they grasp. They try to make love manageable, secure, predictable. But love will not be caged. The wise, the truly wise, learn to let go, not with recklessness, but with reverence. With the quiet understanding that to live at all is to risk everything. To love someone is not to possess them, not to anchor them, but to see them, truly see them, and allow them to be as they are. Marriage, for instance, was once understood not as a prison of obligation, but as a friendship of mutual freedom, a setting loose of two souls who choose, day by day, to walk beside each other. And in that space of honesty, not pretending to feel what you no longer feel, not clinging to outdated vows, but facing one another openly, there is love. Now, there are those who try to simulate love, to perform it, as it were. And this, you must know, is always destructive. For false love builds resentment on both sides. The one pretending grows bitter, and the one deceived feels the sting of absence. Real love has no script. It arises naturally, like laughter or sunlight. And when you find it, when it moves in you, the only sane response is to let it do what it must, even if it changes you, especially if it changes you. Because love, in the end, is not what you hold, it is what holds you. Now you may say, all right, this idea of surrendering to love is all very well, but what if I don't feel it? What if love doesn't come naturally to me? What if I really do try to love others, to be kind, to give of myself, and still it feels false? Well, you see, you cannot teach a selfish person to be unselfish by any method that appeals to his selfishness. That is to say, a person can give away everything he owns, or offer up his body to be burned, and still be acting out of the most cunning self-interest. It can be done, oh yes, with marvelous subtlety, a kind of spiritual one-upmanship. He may appear generous, saintly even, but deep underneath he's still on the take. And that kind of love, what we might call simulated love, is always, always destructive. It leaves behind a bitterness. It builds resentment not only in the one performing the false loving, but also in the poor soul on the receiving end, who begins to suspect that something is off, though they may not know exactly what. This is why so many of our efforts at kindness, at helping, at charitable love fail. They fail because they are not honest. They come not from the heart, but from a posture, from an idea about how one ought to behave. And in doing so, they create not connection, but distance. So what do? Are we to wait around doing nothing until some mysterious grace descends and we suddenly feel real love? Must we sit idly by, selfish as ever, until we're somehow transformed? No, not quite. But there is something to be said for honesty, because that honesty is the beginning of transformation. If, when you look closely at yourself, you discover that you are selfish, then be selfish. But do it consciously. Do it with open eyes. Ask yourself, what is it that I love, even selfishly? What do I cling to? What moves me? For even that clinging, that craving, that too is love. The force is there. It's simply moving in a particular direction. Like water through a hose, it depends which way you're aiming it. Some people love whiskey, others love admiration, some love beauty, or power, or ice cream. And you may say, but that's not real love, that's attachment. But I tell you, it is the same energy. It's simply beginning at the narrow end. So rather than trying to smother it, rather than pretending you're full of divine compassion, when really all you want is another drink, follow the love you do feel. Examine it. Let it run. For only when love is moving can it be redirected. You cannot steer a ship that is still anchored in the harbor. This, you see, is where most go wrong. They think they must first become spiritual, enlightened, holy, then they will be ready to love. But it's the other way around. You begin with where you are, with what truly stirs your heart, even if it seems small or selfish. And if you follow that thread honestly, it will lead you, it will grow. Because as you inquire into what you love, you will find always that what you love is not truly yourself. Not in the ego sense. Even if it begins with you saying, I love myself, and you try to hold that thought, try to grab at this self that you're loving, it slips away. It's like trying to kiss your own lips. You chase it round and round in a circle, and it always evades you. But curiously, when you look at what you do love, whether it's poetry, or a fine meal, or a person's laughter, or even the way the clouds look just before a storm, you discover that what you love is always something outside of what you normally call me. And so, by following your selfishness with honesty, not guilt, not shame, but real attention, you begin to find that the boundary between self and other is not so solid after all. And this, you see, is where something remarkable begins to happen, not because you forced it, or planned it, or tried to become something holy, but because you simply stopped pretending, you stopped posturing. You let the energy move. And in doing so, it begins to transform you. Now we come to a very subtle mistake people make. They imagine there are different kinds of love, as if one were high and pure and another low and carnal. They say, this is real love, spiritual love, and then sneer at the other and say, that's just lust, or mere infatuation. But that division, you see, is entirely artificial. It is based not in perception, but in judgment. For love, in truth, is one single energy. It may take different shapes, just as white light divides itself into the colors of the spectrum, but it is not a different light. You may say the red end of that spectrum is what Freud called libido erotic love, physical desire. And then, moving up through the blues and greens, you come into friendship, companionship, tenderness. And then, at the violet end, you find agape, so-called divine charity, spiritual love. But this division is not one of substance, only of tone. You see, even the most physical, most passionate longing is part of that same current. And the error is in thinking that you can reject one part of it and cultivate the other, like trimming a tree from the top down and expecting it to grow properly. But life doesn't work that way. There's an idea, especially in religious circles, that if you want to find the higher forms of love, you must cut off the lower. You must deny desire, renounce passion, suppress the senses, and only then will the pure kind of love arise. But this is a confusion. The problem isn't that lust exists. The problem is that people are afraid of it. They don't trust themselves to follow the current without being drowned in it. But the truth is, and this is rather beautiful, you let the energy move, and it clarifies itself. The same way a stream begins as a muddy trickle, and by flowing becomes clear. If you dam it up, if you hold it back out of fear, the water stagnates. So instead of condemning the so-called lower forms of love, we might do better to honor where love appears, however strange or unrefined it seems. For there is no need to purify love by cutting parts of it away. You purify it by letting it move freely. And when you really let love move, that is to say, when you follow it without clinging, without turning it into a demand, it begins to show you things. You find the person you desire is not merely a collection of pleasing sensations. No, they are a mystery, a window into something vast and ungraspable. That's when love turns into wonder. But it does so on its own, you see, not because you forced it upward, not because you were pious, but because you were sincere. There is, after all, no merit in pretending not to feel desire when you do. That is not virtue. That is fear wearing the mask of discipline. And fear is no soil for love to grow in. So what we must learn is not to divide love, not to say this part is sacred and that part is shameful, but to recognize that all of it is part of one single movement. Whether you are embracing a lover, or helping a child tie their shoes, or simply watching the evening light fall on the hills, it is the same energy. It is life beholding itself, and the moment you try to possess it, to label it, to capture it, you lose it. Because love, like life, is not a substance, but a flow, and it will not be dammed up or boxed in. So let it move. Let it surprise you. Let it show up in the places you least expect, in the touch of a stranger's hand, in the way the wind brushes your cheek, in the sudden ache of seeing someone who reminds you of a long-lost friend. And you may find, quite by accident, that love was never divided at all. It was always one thing playing many roles. Now this brings us to something rather delicate, the matter of marriage. You see, we've got the whole thing upside down, because in our society, we expect marriage to be based on romantic love, this mysterious, uncontrollable, illogical experience of falling for someone. We expect to be in love before we marry, and we expect to stay in love after we do. And when love as it must shifts its shape, or withdraws for a time, people begin to think something is terribly wrong. But that, you see, is only because the whole thing was built on a misunderstanding. Falling in love, as we've said, is not something you can arrange. It happens. It strikes. And while it is very real, it is also unpredictable. It comes without warning, and it may leave just as mysteriously. So when you base a lifelong commitment on an event as capricious as falling in love, you are building on sand. That's why so many people end up trapped in what I call a pseudo-love affair. They felt passion, hot and strong, and mistook that for the kind of enduring bond needed to build a life together. But when the heat fades, and it will fade, they look across the room and wonder, who is this person I've married? Why don't I feel what I used to feel? And then perhaps they fall in love with someone else suddenly, shockingly, and feel torn between duty and desire. The whole foundation trembles, and families fall to pieces. But the real problem is not the falling in love. The real problem is that we thought love could be secured by an institution. That a ceremony, a ring, a set of vows could guarantee the constancy of the heart. It cannot. Now, this is not to say marriage is wrong, not at all. In fact, marriage can be a beautiful thing, but only if we understand it differently. The older idea, and in many ways the wiser one, was that marriage was a reasonable contract between two people. It was not meant to be a prison of perpetual passion, but a partnership, a cooperation in building a home, raising children, living together as companions. And in that arrangement, love, as we've been speaking of, it could come and go, rise and fall, without threatening the entire structure. If the two people involved were honest with one another, if they said, I marry you because I respect you, I enjoy your company, and I trust you as someone to walk beside, then there is space. Space to allow each person to be who they are. Not a shadow, not a mirror, but a self. And if, within that arrangement, they are also sexually and emotionally drawn to one another, well, so much the better. But that attraction, real as it may be, should not be the foundation. You see, the real virtue in such a marriage is truthfulness, not permanence. It is not saying, I will always feel the same toward you, but rather, I will not lie about what I feel. That is a much deeper commitment. It means not pretending when the feeling changes. It means not clinging when the wind shifts. It means respecting the other not as an extension of yourself, but as a living being who may grow in directions you cannot predict. And it also means this, that if love, unexpected and uninvited, comes to one of you from another source, it is not necessarily a betrayal, it is a happening, something that must be acknowledged with care, but not condemned out of hand. What ruins marriages is not love for another, it is dishonesty. It is the pretense that nothing is changing when everything is. So perhaps we should begin to think of marriage, if it is to be holy, not as the chaining of two people together, but as a mutual setting free, a choosing again and again, to walk together not out of obligation, but out of recognition, out of the quiet joy of seeing, yes, there you are, still you, still new, still becoming. And that, you see, makes room for love to breathe. It is not a love that must always burn brightly. Sometimes it will flicker, sometimes it will dim. But in that space of honesty and freedom, it is allowed to find its own rhythm, like the moon pulling at the tide. And when love is allowed to come and go without being caged, it often returns deeper, wiser, and far more real. Now then, what happens when you stop trying to love? When you give up the whole idea of how it's supposed to feel, what it should look like, how long it must last, and simply allow love to arise as it will, like a breeze through an open window, you begin to see that love is not something you do. It's not a performance or an effort. It's not manufactured through virtue or discipline. It's something that arises like breath, like laughter, like birdsong at dawn, when you are no longer trying to control it. And that, you see, is the mystery. Love does not flow from you. It flows through you. When you stop grasping, stop making bargains with the universe, love begins to appear everywhere. In the face of a stranger, in the sound of rain on an old roof, in the trembling of your own hands. And when it does, don't cling. Let it move. Let it rise and fall. For love, like water, cannot be held without being lost. You see, it's like drifting on a river. The current is strong, and you don't know where it's taking you. But the more you thrash and fight, the more you go under. Yet if you relax, if you float, the river carries you, not always where you expected, but often where you most needed to go. And so, to love is to trust the current, not to know its destination, not to chart its course, but to give yourself to it entirely. This is the deepest act of faith. Not to love with conditions, but to let love be what it is, wild, uncertain, untamable, and still say yes. So don't be afraid if love makes you foolish. Don't be afraid if it hurts. Don't be afraid if it asks you to change again and again. For you are not meant to control it. You are meant to be moved by it. And when you trust that movement, when you surrender to the flow, you'll discover that the river was never separate from you at all. It was always you, all along, coming home to yourself. So the point is, therefore, that you can do everything you have to do in this spirit. Don't make a distinction between work and play. Regard everything that you're doing as play, and don't imagine for 1 minute that you've got to be serious about it. We live in a world where almost everyone believes quite sincerely that something is wrong with them, that they ought to be more this or less that, smarter, kinder, more disciplined, more enlightened, less anxious, less angry, less human. And so they go chasing endlessly after some future version of themselves, always just around the bend, where they finally get it all right. But I'd like to suggest something a little scandalous, that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you, at all. Your very being, this moment, this breath, this strange and sacred sense of I am is already perfect. Not perfect in the moral sense. Not tidy, polished, or well-behaved. But perfect the way a flame dances, or a tree bends in the wind, or a galaxy spins. You see, you're not something apart from nature, observing it from a distance. You are nature, just as much as the stars, the ocean, and the clouds. The patterns of your thoughts, your laughter, your sorrow. They are every bit as natural as the ripples in water or the sound of thunder. And you don't need to do a thing to earn your place here. Because the truth is, you are all already an extraordinary phenomenon of the universe. You're just like that. And that is enough. One of the most extraordinary realizations, and it's not mystical or religious, but simply factual, is this. You didn't come into this world. You came out of it, just as an apple tree apples the universe peoples. And you are one of those people. You're not a stranger wandering through a foreign land. You are this place, its eyes, its thoughts, its wonderings about itself. Now, most of us were brought up to feel separate, as though we're tiny egos, trapped inside these bags of skin, looking out at a world that's over there, full of objects and others. But that's a trick of perception, an illusion of language and labeling. In reality, there's no line where you stop and the world begins. You are continuous with it, like a wave is with the ocean. Look at a flame. Does it have a boundary, a fixed shape? It's a process, a happening, a flow. So are you. You are not a static thing. You are a verb disguised as a noun. A whirl of consciousness, feelings, memories, all shimmering like light on water. When you were born, the universe didn't make a mistake. It wasn't trying to test you, fix you, or mold you into something better. It was expressing itself as you. And what a peculiar, delightful, and intricate expression you are. No one else has your exact rhythm, your exact voice, your particular pattern of laughter and silence. That isn't random. That's design in the deepest, most spontaneous sense. But here's where the confusion sets in. From a young age, we were taught to override that naturalness, to conform, to behave, to achieve, to become someone. And in doing so, we began to believe the greatest lie of all, that we are somehow not enough, that we must become rather than simply be. But tell me, have you ever seen a flower straining to bloom? Have you ever seen a tree hurrying to grow? They just do it. They unfold because they are that unfolding. You too are unfolding. You too are nature playing itself out. You are not a problem to be solved. You are not a project to be completed. You are an event of the cosmos, as marvelous as the stars, and just as inevitable. So look again, not with your eyes, but with your being, and perhaps, just perhaps, you'll start to recognize the miracle you've always been. Now, I know when someone says, there's nothing wrong with you, the conditioned mind resists. You might think, but what about my past, my failures, my guilt, my habits, my shame? And yet, all of that too is part of the play, part of the process. You see, from the very beginning, we're handed a story. That being alive is a test. That you're here to prove something to God, to society, to your parents, to yourself. And so we become actors in a theater of self-improvement, constantly fixing, adjusting, striving as if life were a ladder to climb rather than a mystery to dance. But what if that whole project was built on a false premise? The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple, and yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. So let's try this. Close your eyes for a moment and feel the sensation of being, the aliveness that is present before any opinion or judgment arises. That is you. Not the inner critic, not the timeline, not the to-do list, just the raw, open presence of being here. And what could possibly be wrong with that? Look at the clouds. They don't align themselves neatly into rows. They drift, they swirl, they form and dissolve. Is there anything wrong with them? No one scolds a wave for crashing too early, or a tree for growing crooked. They are not judged by some cosmic scoreboard. But we human beings somehow believe we are the exception, that we alone must justify our existence, that we must earn the right to be. And this is the root of our suffering, the original illusion. The truth is, your imperfections are not mistakes, they are textures, details, echoes of your particular music. You don't need to become worthy of life, you are life, expressing itself in human form. Just like fire flickers, just like water flows, even your attempt to become spiritual, even your desire to improve yourself, is already part of the perfection. It's like the ocean trying to become wet, or a sunbeam trying to shine. It's unnecessary, and yet even that is allowed. So instead of chasing some polished idea of who you ought to be, what if you simply noticed who you already are? Right now, without changing anything, without editing, without effort. There's nothing wrong with you. There never was. It's only the thought that says so, and you're not that thought. You are the silence behind it, the spaciousness that watches it come and go. And once you see this, not as a belief, but as a direct experience, something inside relaxes. And in that space, in that letting go, you begin to remember something ancient and true. You are nature wild, vast, unfinished, and beautiful. And you are just like that. You see, when I say you don't need to do anything, I don't mean you should sit still like a lump of stone. No. No. I mean something far subtler. I mean you don't need to strain to be what you already are. You don't push the river, you float with it. Because the river is doing the flowing, not you. And in the same way, life is living itself through you. Birds don't sing to impress. They sing because it is their nature. You don't have to force meaning or chase purpose. It emerges like a breeze, like a laugh, like a melody, when you stop trying to manufacture it. Effortless action, as the Taoists say. Wu Wei, not laziness, not apathy, but the art of moving with the current rather than against it. And when you discover that rhythm, the one where you are no longer doing life, but being it, then the dance begins. Now here's a peculiar little paradox. Most of us spend our lives trying to be ourselves. But the moment you try, the moment you reach for authenticity, like a product on a shelf, you've already lost it. Because the self is not something you can grasp. It's something you relax into. Trying to be spontaneous is like trying to fall asleep on purpose. The very effort prevents the happening. We're so busy asking, am I doing it right? Am I healed yet? Am I authentic now? That we miss the very thing we're looking for. It's like chasing your own shadow around the room. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with the chase. It's adorable, in a way. The ego, trying to polish itself like a stone, endlessly sanding, refining, spiritualizing. But eventually, you begin to laugh. Because you realize the one doing all the fixing is the very thing that doesn't need to exist. It's all a bit of cosmic theater. You don't need to become yourself. You already are, right here, in your quirks, your flaws, your silence, your breath. Authenticity isn't something you try to achieve, it's what's left when you stop pretending. And that is freedom. Now, if we really want to go a little deeper, we have to look at something very peculiar. You didn't invent the image you have of yourself. It was handed to you, constructed, layer by layer, built out of glances, comments, expectations, like a mirror made of other people's thoughts. From the moment you were old enough to speak, you were told who you are. What's acceptable, what's not, what earns love, and what doesn't. And so, without even realizing it, you began to shape yourself according to the reflections around you. You became a collection of borrowed ideas, a patchwork personality stitched together from parents, teachers, religions, and then one day, maybe in your 20s, maybe much later, you start to feel tired, not physically, but existentially. As though you've been wearing someone else's clothes for so long, you forgot how your own skin feels. That's the moment, that little flicker of rebellion, that sense that the person you've been performing as isn't the one who's actually alive in there. The most dangerous thing you can do is believe your own role. Because the role is fine, it's useful, even. But it's not you. You are what's playing the role. You are the actor, not the mask. But society teaches you to mistake the costume for the being. You become the good girl, the strong man, the productive adult, and forget that you're also a storm, a poem, a mystery. And so, when people say, be yourself, what they often mean is, be the version of yourself we like the most. But that's not freedom, that's still a performance. The real task is to see through the performance. Not to destroy it, you don't need to rebel with clenched fists, but to recognize that it's just a costume. And when you see it as such, you can finally take it off, or wear it playfully, like a child in a mask. Because the one underneath, that's the real you. The one who doesn't need to be impressive, who isn't worried about being liked, who doesn't have to be good, or enlightened, or enough. That one, the silent, observing, breathing aliveness behind all the stories, was never broken, and never needed fixing. It only needed remembering. So then, what's left? If you are not the voice in your head, not the roles you've been assigned, not the identity you've spent years defending, what remains? Silence. The space in which all thoughts arise and fade. The stillness behind the movement. You see, awakening is not a matter of adding anything. It's not about gathering spiritual merit badges or perfecting your personality. It's a matter of subtraction, of unlearning, like a muddy pond clearing when the stirring stops. You don't need to do anything for clarity. You simply allow the mud to settle. But most people are afraid of that silence, because in silence the ego cannot speak. And without noise, it begins to disappear. Yet that's where your real nature is hiding. Not in the struggle, but in the surrender. The self, the true self, isn't discovered by thinking more, but by thinking less. By looking inward, not with judgment, but with wonder. And in that gentle noticing, you begin to feel it, a quiet hum behind your chest. A spaciousness where the need to become finally dissolves. And what's left is being pure, present, unconditional, just like that. So then, how does one live like this, without all the grasping, the fixing, the polishing? Well, like the sky. The sky doesn't hold on to the clouds, doesn't chase the sun or argue with the storm, it just lets things pass through. And you, if you stop clinging so tightly to your story, can live like that too. No need to constantly edit yourself, no need to be better all the time. Because once you realize you are the sky and not the passing weather, everything becomes a little... You begin to trust life more. Not because you figured it all out, but because you no longer believe you need to. There's a rhythm to things, a timing that doesn't belong to the clock, but to the heart. And when you stop pushing so hard, you can actually hear it. And that's the irony, isn't it? When you stop trying so hard to live the right way, you begin living the real way. More wonder, less control, more play, less proving. Because trees don't strive to be trees, and waves don't try to crash correctly. They just are. And so are you. So let yourself be lived. Let life happen through you without interference. Because you are just like that, and that is more than enough. And so we return to the beginning, to that strange and wonderful statement, there is nothing wrong with you at all. Not as a comforting sentiment, but as a radical, liberating truth. You are not something broken that needs to be repaired. You are not some spiritual project waiting to be completed. You are in this very moment an unfolding mystery, a ripple in eternity, a brief song in the great silence. And if you can see yourself in the right way, not through the eyes of judgment or self-doubt, but as a phenomenon of nature like fire, or clouds, or galaxies, then you will see you were never separate. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were just like that. Not perfect but whole. Not flawless but complete. And all that's left is to remember, to drop the pretense, to breathe in and simply be. Because once you stop chasing after some future version of yourself, you'll realize you've been home all along. Not in the world's idea of success, not in someone else's approval, but in your own quiet presence, in the simple sacred fact that you exist, and that is quite enough. The Upanishads say, if you think you understand Brahman, you do not understand. But if you know that you do not understand, then you truly understand. Because the Godhead, the eternal self, is never an object of its own knowledge. Just as a knife can't cut itself, fire doesn't burn itself, and light doesn't illuminate itself, you cannot grasp yourself. And if you think you've done it, you've only grasped a reflection. This is the great mystery. The thing that you're looking for is what's looking so naturally you can't find it. You can't pin it down. Fire doesn't burn itself. Light doesn't shine on itself. You can't see your own eyes without a mirror. So you say, I don't know. And in that, something deeper listens. And so, in that moment of truly not knowing of, letting go of all your mental grasping you are, in a sense, finally at peace with the mystery. And in that, curiously enough, something deeper listens. Here's the strange thing. When you stop holding on so tightly, you begin to feel stronger. Most of us are constantly using energy to manage everything, to plan, to worry, to make sure things go exactly our way. And it's exhausting. We're trying to control life, as if we're running the whole show. But the moment you stop clinging, stop defending, stop trying to force things, you free up that energy, and it doesn't disappear. It returns to you. That's the paradox. You gain real power by letting go of control. Not by giving up, but by trusting the Tao, the way of things. It flows. It moves to the left and to the right. It supports all things without needing to dominate them. And when it accomplishes something, it doesn't take credit. It doesn't boast. It just moves on. That's the kind of power that doesn't need to prove itself. The more you trust, the more power you actually have. Not over others, but with life. And so strangely, when you let go, you don't lose anything. You gain alignment. You flow with something much larger, something that's been holding you the entire time. Letting go isn't weakness. It's intelligence. The way to become one with the universe is not by trying to control it. That only disturbs it, makes it feel like something outside you, something you have to conquer. And the more you try to conquer it, the more it slips away. You make it feel separate, foreign, something to be managed. But when you begin to trust it like you would trust another person, something shifts. You say, let's see what you're going to do. And in doing that, you're not just speaking to the universe out there, you're speaking to yourself. Because ultimately, you don't know where your decisions come from. They just appear. Like hiccups. They bubble up from the depths. This is the strange thing about trust. It looks like a risk, but it turns out to be a return to how things already work. You trust your heart to beat. You trust your nervous system to wake you in the morning. You can even say, I want to wake up at 6 o'clock. And more often than not, you do. As if something in you knows, even though you don't. That's the principle. Let the world move as it does, and you begin to move with it. When we decide, we worry. Did I think about it long enough? Did I take in all the facts? Did I overlook something? But the truth is, you never can consider all the data. In any situation, the number of variables is infinite. You think you've worked it all out, but you haven't. So what you do is go through the motions. You weigh this and that, and then when the moment comes, you make a snap judgment. It pops out almost by itself. Sometimes you get the vague outline of things. Sometimes you make a good decision on rational grounds. But more often than not, you forget all the variables that could have gone wrong. And somehow, it works. That's the mystery. The problem isn't making decisions. The problem is thinking you can make them perfectly. Like the man sorting potatoes. Chopping wood was fine. Fixing fences was fine. But sorting potatoes into pile, sell, seed, discard was too much. Decision after decision after decision. That's the weight we carry. And it's unnecessary. The more you try to decide with total certainty, the more anxious you become. But when you let go a little, something deeper takes over. Something that already knows. Very great business people are not the ones who try to control every detail. They are the ones who delegate authority, who trust others to act. And in doing so, they create something that works like a living organism. Not a machine, not a dictatorship, a body. Because life itself functions this way. Constant delegation. Trust at every level. Cells don't report back to central headquarters. They act. And in acting, they cooperate in a system far more intelligent than any one part could understand. Evolution itself depends on this. Constant adaptation, mutual participation, kind of unconscious wisdom. This is why democracy is superior to monarchy. Not because it's always right, but because it allows for that synergizing intelligence of a complex system made of individuals who don't fully know what's going on, but who together form something that works. That's the pattern of nature. That's how intelligence spreads not by force, but by participation. When you let go of control and trust others, you're not weakening your position. You're entering into the same dynamic that drives life forward. To trust is not to be naive. It is to be aligned with the very structure of existence. When you move with the flow, life begins to cooperate. There's a story of the Kon-Tiki expedition. A man builds a raft from balsa wood to sail from South America across the Pacific. It's an experiment, a leap of faith. He sets it in motion and soon discovers all sorts of unexpected things working in his favor. When the wood got wet, it swelled and the ropes bit into it, locking everything tightly. He hadn't planned that. Flying fish landed on the deck each morning, breakfast delivered. He had touched the key. He wasn't struggling against nature. He wasn't trying to force anything. He was cooperating with the larger movement, aligning with something older, deeper, and more intelligent than any personal plan. And the astonishing thing was how many things went right, how much unseen help arrived. Because when you stop resisting the current, when you stop trying to dominate the ocean, you find it already knows where to take you. You're not in charge. You're part of something vast. And the more you let that be true, the more everything starts to work. Not always the way you expect, but the way it needs to. It has become practical politics now, not just virtue, not self-sacrifice, but necessity to let go of control. In earlier times, people spoke of utopia as a dream, but now it is urgent. Because if we don't learn how to enjoy ourselves, we will destroy ourselves. In an age of leisure, people must know how to be at ease. If not, we'll smash the whole future of the human race in boredom, anxiety, and endless bickering. It's happening already. Everyone picking a new scapegoat, each side blaming the other, and yet none of it is relevant. Because the root isn't left or right, good or bad, us or them. The root is fear, the fear of letting go, the fear of trusting what we don't control. And so the paradox, you must learn to enjoy yourself. You must risk following what brings life. Not in a selfish sense, but because that's how intelligence works. That's how it always has. You don't need to fight to be good. You need to relax enough to remember what you are. If we don't learn how to enjoy life with depth and sincerity, we'll go on tearing each other up at each side, convinced it's saving the world. So we come back to the question, what do I want? And the honest answer, for most of us, is I don't know. And that not knowing, if you stay with it, is the beginning of something extraordinary. Because when you really stop to ask, not from the surface of the mind, but from the depths, the answers you once thought were true begin to fade. First, you name things. I think I'd like this or that. I want comfort, I want love, I want security. And those may satisfy you for a while. But then you look again, and you say, no, I don't think that's quite it either. And finally you arrive at silence. Why don't you know what you want? Two reasons. One, you already have it. Two, you can never truly see yourself. You are the source of wanting, and a knife cannot cut itself, a flame cannot burn itself. You cannot grasp what you are, and in that mystery something else stirs. What I want is what you want, and I don't know what you want. Surprise me. That's the link. That's the kinship between I and thou. Everything is falling apart. Not just you, not just your plans. Everything. We are in constant dissolution. Every structure, every hope, every tower. The world men set their hearts upon turns to ash, or if it prospers, it vanishes like snow upon desert sand. All of it fades, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the great globe itself will dissolve. And like an insubstantial pageant, leave not a rack behind. You see, this isn't something to fear, it's liberation. You don't have to let go, because there is nothing to hold. Nature is already letting go for you, and that, curiously, is the great helper. When you stop resisting the inevitable, when you stop pretending permanence exists, you stop struggling, you stop grasping, and then something else shows up. A power you didn't create, an energy that isn't yours, yet flows through you. It had been hidden behind your efforts to control, but now it's free, and so are you. Anytime you let go of control, truly let go, you find a curious thing. You begin to have access to power, but not the kind of power that comes from force, not the kind that manipulates or resists. This is something altogether different. It is energy that arises when you are no longer wasting yourself on self-defense, when you are no longer holding up the illusion of control. Most people are constantly trying to manage things. trying to push the world around, to bend it to their will. And that takes effort, constant strain. It burns energy. But the moment you stop trying to act like you are God, the moment you begin to trust that the world moves on its own, something shifts. The energy that was tied up in fear and resistance becomes available. You have not added anything new. You have simply stopped holding it back. This is why the principle is always the same. The more you give it away, the more it comes back. Not because of some moral law, but because that is how things work. That is the rhythm. The energy that flows in that way is not yours. And yet, it moves through you completely. What we have been talking about is not a belief system. It is not a set of doctrines or dogmas. It is something much closer to an experience. It is not what you think, but what you feel in your bones. Now, this is very different from the emphasis of Western religion. The Western tradition, especially Christianity, has placed enormous weight on belief. Do you believe the right things? Do you hold the correct views? Faith, they say, is what saves you. Not action, not understanding, but faith in the proper doctrines. And early on, the Christian church rejected another kind of path, the path of knowing, what was called gnosis. Not belief, but knowledge gained through direct experience. The Gnostics said there were three kinds of people: the spiritual, the psychological, and the wooden. And the wooden were those most entangled in materiality, those who identified completely with the body. Orthodox Christianity rejected this idea, and perhaps for good reason, because matter is not the enemy of spirit. In the center of the Christian mystery is incarnation, that God became flesh, that the divine entered matter. But somewhere along the way, that insight was lost, and belief took its place. There was a strange monk once, writing under the name Dionysius the Areopagite. He taught something very different from the usual theology. He spoke of knowing God not through definitions, but through unknowing, through a kind of dark knowledge, a cloud of forgetting, a cloud of unknowing. This is not ignorance. It is not confusion. It is the deep intuition that whatever you say about the divine, it is not quite that. If you call it love, you miss. If you call it unity, you miss again. Every word falls short. In one of his small writings, the Theologia Mystica, Dionysius moves through a series of negations. God is not spirit, not mind, not justice, not light, not even one. He says that if anyone, having seen God, understood what they had seen, then what they saw was not God. It was something less. Some creature, perhaps an angel, but not the source. And here he was echoing something much older, something you also find in the Upanishads. The idea that the highest truth is not what can be spoken, but what remains when all speaking stops. When you know that you do not know, that is when you begin to understand. So in the end, to not know is to be open. To let go is not a loss. It is a return. You fall into the rhythm of things. You stop struggling against the current. You begin to trust what you do not understand. And then the universe begins to move with you. Not because you've figured it out, not because you've mastered some technique, but because you've stopped pretending to be separate. You've stopped trying to possess life, and instead you let life pass through you. The energy that comes when you give up control is not yours. It is not personal, but it is generous. It is full. It comes when you no longer need it. And that is the final mystery. The universe will give you what you want, but only when you no longer clutch at it. Only when you stop trying to force it to answer your will. It responds to trust. It answers presence. When you truly do not know, when you no longer grasp, the world opens itself to you, and in that moment you are not a stranger in the cosmos. You are home.
You see, most of us are caught in a peculiar trap. From the time we were children, we were told, "Don't just sit there, do something." Yet rarely does anyone ever say the opposite. Rarely does anyone whisper, "Don't just do something, sit there." We've grown up believing that to be valuable, we must always be in motion, always planning, always producing, always chasing. And so, if we find ourselves idle, simply sitting, breathing, existing, we feel guilty, as though we've wasted precious time. But here is the paradox. What if, in your endless effort to make life happen, you have missed the very thing you were searching for? What if the secret, the great irony, is that when you stop trying so hard to get somewhere, when you stop forcing the river to flow faster, life unfolds with a grace and beauty you could never manufacture? Now, I don't mean to say that doing nothing is lying flat on your back forever or ignoring every responsibility. No, doing nothing is not laziness. Doing nothing is not apathy. It is, rather, the art of stepping back. It is learning to dance with the flow of things instead of exhausting yourself trying to control it all. But why does this sound so terrifying? Why does the idea of doing nothing feel like failure? It is because we live in a culture that worships busyness. From morning until night, we are intoxicated by activity. People boast about how little they sleep, as if exhaustion is a badge of honor. We measure worth in productivity, in achievements, in the size of our to-do lists. And so we've built a strange superstition that to pause, to rest, is to fall behind. But ask yourself, fall behind what? Behind whom? Is there really a race going on, or have we simply imagined one? Because if you stop and look carefully, you will notice that life is not racing anywhere. The trees are not in a hurry to grow. The stars are not rushing across the sky. The ocean waves do not panic about whether they will reach the shore in time. Only we humans, with our anxious little calendars and ticking clocks, seem to believe that life is a competition. You see, the trouble is not that life is fast. The trouble is that we do not know how to be still. We don't trust stillness. We think that if we aren't constantly doing, constantly becoming, then nothing valuable is happening. But the great secret is precisely this. In the silence, in the stillness, something extraordinary is already unfolding. Let me give you an example. Imagine a farmer planting seeds. If he digs them up every day to check if they are growing, nothing will happen. The soil requires patience, darkness, time. The farmer must trust the process of growth, which is invisible. Doing nothing in this case is not laziness, it is wisdom. For the most important things in life, love, growth, healing, cannot be forced. They must be allowed. And so, what I call the secret power of doing nothing is really the courage to trust life, to stop trying to bully it, manipulate it, control it, to relax and let the universe breathe through you. But many of us are frightened by this. We say, if I don't strive, I will lose everything. If I stop pushing, nothing will happen. My dreams will vanish. But that fear is based on the illusion that you are the sole creator of life, that everything depends upon your endless effort. And yet, think for a moment. Who taught your heart to beat? Who told your lungs to breathe? Who grew your bones when you were a child? Was that your effort? Or was it the effortless work of life itself? This is what I mean by doing nothing. It is not giving up, it is giving in. It is surrendering to the intelligence of life, which has been carrying you all along, whether you knew it or not. And here's the wonderful thing. When you finally allow yourself to do nothing, when you give yourself permission to simply exist without agenda, something remarkable happens. The anxiety begins to soften. The mind becomes clear. The heart opens. Suddenly you discover a sense of freedom that all your striving could not give you. Of course, the ego resists this. The ego loves to be busy. It says, look at me, I am accomplishing, I am important, I am in control. But deep down, the ego is terribly afraid. It is afraid that if you stop, you will realize the truth, that life doesn't need your frantic control in order to happen. And this is perhaps the greatest relief of all, that you are not the manager of the universe. Now, I invite you to consider this. If you were to take even a single day and refuse to do anything not out of laziness, but as an experiment, what would happen? You would sit, you would breathe, you would watch the sunlight move across the room. Perhaps you would notice the birds or the sound of the wind. At first, you might feel restless. You might think I'm wasting time, but slowly you would realize that time itself is not something to waste. Life is happening perfectly well without your interference. And the more you see this, the more you discover that the power of doing nothing is not passive, it is profoundly creative, because in that emptiness, in that stillness, new insights arise. Creativity blossoms. Love deepens. You become more alive than when you were desperately trying to be alive. This is why, in the East, there is an idea called Wu Wei, which means effortless action, or action without force. It is the way of nature, the way of water. Water never tries to force its way, yet it wears down mountains. Water does not strive, yet it nourishes everything. To live in the spirit of Wu Wei is to rediscover that your life, too, can flow with ease if only you would stop interfering with it. But here's the catch. Doing nothing is difficult for those who believe their worth is measured by what they do. And so, for many of you listening, the practice of doing nothing will feel uncomfortable, even scary. But that discomfort is precisely the doorway. For when you learn to rest in the silence, when you trust yourself to be rather than constantly become, you awaken to a deeper kind of life. And so, my dear friends, the secret power of doing nothing is not a trick, not a shortcut. It is a profound realization that you were never meant to race, to chase, to force. You were meant to be. And in being, you discover that all you ever wanted was already here. You see, one of the deepest reasons we cannot sit still, one of the reasons we fear doing nothing, is because society has conditioned us to equate our value with our productivity. From school to work, from the first grade to our careers, the message has been relentless. Keep moving, keep proving, keep achieving. When we rest, the mind whispers, you are falling behind. But behind what? Behind whom? The truth is, there is no finish line, only the illusion of one. This illusion is carefully maintained by culture. Advertisements tell us that we are incomplete, that we must buy, improve, strive, and hustle to be somebody. Social media feeds us endless comparisons, showing us curated lives of others who seem always busy, always successful. We then measure ourselves against this fantasy and conclude, I must do more. Thus, the moment we try to sit still, guilt rises. And that guilt is not natural, it is taught. It is the echo of a culture addicted to speed. We seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own. For we think in terms of languages and images which we did not invent, but which were given to us by our society. This is true about our obsession with busyness. It is not a natural instinct, it is a borrowed program. And to break free, one must dare to disobey the program, to reclaim stillness as a form of rebellion. Think of how animals live. A cat can sit by a window for hours, watching nothing in particular, entirely content. A bird may perch on a branch, doing nothing, yet fully alive. Only humans call this laziness. But why? Because humans carry the weight of self-importance. We think we are managers of the universe, and so doing nothing feels like negligence, as if the stars will fall out of the sky unless we keep moving. But this is illusion. Life does not need our frantic supervision. Doing nothing, then, is not just an act of rest, it is an act of truth. It reveals to us that we were never the controllers, only the participants. The river flows without our pushing. The sun rises without our permission. The heart beats without our command. And so, when we pause, when we surrender, we rediscover that life is trustworthy. This realization is liberating. For the greatest freedom is not in controlling life, but in finally allowing it to unfold. So the real question becomes, why are we so afraid of stillness? Because in stillness, all our distractions fall away. When we sit quietly without tasks or entertainment, we are left with ourselves. And many of us are not comfortable with that. We fear our own thoughts, our own silence. Yet this is precisely why doing nothing is powerful. It forces us to meet the self we keep avoiding. This encounter is not meant to frighten us, but to wake us. For the self we fear is not a monster, but a misunderstood companion. Beneath all the noise of judgment and comparison, there is a presence that is already whole, already complete. By daring to do nothing, we give ourselves the chance to rediscover this presence. Consider how modern life has shaped our nervous systems. Endless notifications, constant news, rushing schedules, they keep us in a state of low-grade panic. And when that panic becomes normal, silence feels strange, even dangerous. But when you practice stillness, the nervous system recalibrates, your breath deepens, your heart slows, and your mind begins to expand rather than contract. Doing nothing is medicine for a world addicted to noise. But here lies the paradox. Doing nothing is not about achievement. If you approach it with the thought, I will become better by being still, you are already missing the point. The power of doing nothing is in its purposelessness. It is sacred because it is free from utility. It is an act without agenda, and in that freedom, life reveals itself in ways no amount of striving ever can. Think about the moments when you've had your greatest insights. Rarely do they come when you are grinding, forcing, straining. More often, they arrive when you are walking aimlessly, gazing at the sky, or simply resting. Creativity does not emerge from pressure, it blossoms in space. This is why many traditions speak of stillness as holy, not because it serves a function, but because it reminds us of who we truly are when all functions fall away. To understand the wisdom of doing nothing, look at nature. Trees do not rush to grow, they simply stand in the sun, and the process unfolds. Rivers do not strain to flow, they move naturally toward the sea. Flowers do not force themselves to bloom, they open when the season is right. Life itself demonstrates that being is enough, yet humans, in our restlessness, try to outsmart nature. We imagine we can engineer happiness, plan enlightenment, schedule serenity. And in the process, we forget that the universe has already set the rhythm. When you watch waves, you don't see one wave trying to be better than another. You don't see competition, only movement, only flow. But we humans, we are taught to compare, to evaluate, to rank ourselves endlessly. So when we sit still, we feel guilty, we feel unproductive, yet perhaps that is the very illness of our age, the inability to simply exist without justification. Doing nothing restores the forgotten truth that life does not need your approval to be valuable. Think of your own heart. Right now, it beats without your permission. Your lungs breathe without your effort. Your body is a miracle of doing without doing, and yet your mind believes it must carry the world on its shoulders. What if, instead, you trusted the same intelligence that beats your heart and moves the stars? That is the essence of the secret power of doing nothing. It returns you to trust. To trust that life, in its vastness, does not depend on your constant interference. There is also freedom in recognizing that nothing is truly wasted. When you do nothing, when you rest, when you wander without a goal, the world does not collapse. In fact, often things fall into place. Problems that seemed unsolvable begin to dissolve on their own. Decisions that felt impossible suddenly become clear. This is not magic, it is alignment. By stepping back, you allow life to breathe through you. You discover that you are not the driver of existence, but its expression. And yet, we resist. We cling to the illusion of control, believing that if we stop pushing, everything will fall apart. But have you noticed that when you finally stop worrying about a situation, it often resolves itself? Have you noticed that when you stop chasing after someone, they sometimes return on their own? This is not coincidence, it is the principle of harmony. When you relax into the moment, you stop creating friction. You allow life to unfold as it was meant to, not as you insist it should. Doing nothing does not mean being irresponsible. It does not mean abandoning your duties or ignoring life's realities. What it means is learning when to stop interfering, when to let life breathe. Imagine trying to hold water tightly in your hands. The harder you grip, the more it slips away. But if you cup your palms gently, the water rests there. This is the paradox. Control is lost by force and gained by trust. When you allow things to unfold, you discover a deeper order, one that cannot be managed, only experienced. This is why the greatest spiritual teachers, sages, and mystics often speak of surrender, not surrender in defeat, but surrender in recognition, the recognition that life is larger than your will. You cannot command the tides, You cannot force the seasons, and you cannot dictate the rhythm of love. When you realize this, doing nothing becomes the highest wisdom. You stop fighting the river and allow it to carry you. In that flow, you are not diminished. You are liberated. Freedom is not found in controlling life, but in trusting it. Imagine dancing. If you try to control every movement, you lose the rhythm. But if you allow the music to guide you, the dance flows effortlessly. Life is like that dance. The more you try to choreograph it, the more you stumble. But when you let the universe lead, you discover grace. Doing nothing is not passivity. It is the art of cooperation with existence. There is also profound courage in doing nothing. It takes bravery to stop running, to stop distracting yourself, to face the silence of simply being. Most people cannot bear it. They need constant noise, endless motion, because stillness reveals the truth, that we are not in control, that life is fragile, that we are temporary. But in facing that silence, you find peace. You realize that being temporary is not a curse, but a blessing. Doing nothing shows you that impermanence is not something to fear. It is the very reason life is precious. Think of the sky. Clouds drift by. Storms come and go, but the sky remains. Your thoughts, your worries, your ambitions, they are the clouds. Doing nothing is returning to the sky itself, the vast openness that holds everything yet clings to nothing. In this spaciousness, you realize that no effort is required to be complete. You are already whole. You were never broken. The secret power of doing nothing is that it dissolves the illusion of incompleteness. It shows you that you have always been enough. Now, what happens when you truly embrace doing nothing? Something unexpected. Life takes care of itself. The world does not collapse because you stopped meddling. In fact, you often discover that things move more smoothly without your constant interference. The flower blooms without your effort. The heart beats without your command. The sun rises without your permission. And so, the power of doing nothing is that it reveals the harmony already present in existence. Consider relationships. Many of us destroy love by trying to control it. We push, we pull, we demand, we cling. But when you stop interfering, when you give the other space, love grows naturally. Doing nothing in love is not neglect, it is trust. It is knowing that affection cannot be forced, that intimacy cannot be manufactured. Love, like a tree, needs room to grow. If you stand back, if you allow, you discover that love flourishes in ways you never expected. Think also of creativity. Artists often suffer because they force themselves to produce. They sit in front of the canvas, the page, the instrument, and strain to make something happen. But the best art comes when you stop trying. When you relax, when you daydream, when you do nothing, the idea suddenly arrives. Inspiration is like a bird. Chase it and it flies away, sit quietly and it lands on your shoulder. Doing nothing is the secret doorway to true creativity. And what about happiness? Isn't it strange that the harder you try to be happy, the more it slips away? Happiness, like sleep, cannot be willed. If you try to sleep, you stay awake. If you try to be happy, you become tense. But when you let go, when you stop chasing, happiness appears on its own. Doing nothing reveals that joy is not something you achieve. It is something you notice, something that has been with you all along. The world we live in is addicted to effort, always striving, always reaching, always chasing the next milestone. But the wisdom of doing nothing is revolutionary. It says you don't need to strive. You don't need to prove. You don't need to achieve. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to breathe. You are allowed to simply exist. And in that simple existence, you rediscover life's beauty. The bird song, the laughter of a child, the wind through the trees, all of it becomes radiant again. Perhaps the greatest gift of doing nothing is freedom. When you stop trying to control life, you are no longer enslaved by it. You become free to enjoy it, to play with it, to dance with it. You realize that you don't have to carry the world on your shoulders, it carries itself. You don't have to fix yourself, you were never broken. You don't have to justify your existence, you are existence itself. This is the power of doing nothing. Now, imagine if you truly lived this way. Imagine waking up tomorrow and not rushing, not forcing, not grasping. Imagine simply allowing life to unfold. You would find that things still get done, but with less stress. You would find that love still flows, but with more ease. You would find that happiness still appears, but with less struggle. Doing nothing does not mean abandoning life, it means finally being present for it. And so, I leave you with this thought. Life was never meant to be a race. It was never meant to be conquered or mastered. It was meant to be lived, savored, experienced. Doing nothing is the way back to this truth. It is the art of stepping aside so that life can show itself to you. When you stop running, when you stop forcing, when you stop chasing, you discover that you were already where you wanted to be. Remember, the flower does not strive to bloom, the river does not struggle to flow, and the stars do not labor to shine. They simply are, and in their being, they are magnificent. You are no different. You are part of this same universe, this same unfolding. You do not need to justify your existence. You do not need to prove your worth. Simply by being, you are already enough. So the secret power of doing nothing is not laziness nor apathy. It is wisdom. It is the recognition that life is complete as it is, that you are complete as you are. When you embrace doing nothing, you discover that everything you sought was already here. And in that discovery, there is peace, there is freedom, there is joy. Who are you? That's the question we've all been trained to answer since we could speak. I'm Sarah, I'm an engineer, I'm a father, I'm a student, I'm this, I'm that. We present our identities like name tags as if they could truly capture the vast mystery of what we are. But here's the truth. All those labels are costumes, beautiful ones maybe, but costumes nonetheless. And the more tightly we grip them, the more we forget that at our core, we are something far larger, far freer, and far less definable than any identity could ever contain. From birth, society hands us scripts. You are given a name. You are given a gender. You are told which family you belong to, which culture you represent, which religion you might follow. As you grow, the script expands, your school grades, your career path, your relationship status. It becomes a kind of biography that you believe is you. But all of these things are not who you are, they are what you are doing. They are the roles you play in the grand theater of life. And like any good actor, you can switch roles. But the problem is, we forget we're acting at all. Why do we cling so fiercely to these roles? Because they give us a sense of stability. If I'm somebody, then I know my place in the world. It feels safe. But here's the paradox. The more you define yourself, the more you limit yourself. The moment you say, I am this, you've also said, I am not that. You build walls around your own potential. And worse, you start to protect this identity as if it were your actual life. You fear change because it threatens your story. You fear failure because it could rewrite your character in ways you don't like. This is why letting go of identity feels terrifying. It's like stepping into a void. If I'm not my job, my nationality, my beliefs, then what am I? We fear that if we drop the mask, there will be nothing left. But what if that nothing is not emptiness, but openness? What if behind the mask is the real you, not a solid, fixed thing, but a flowing, ever-changing awareness that can never be reduced to a label? Being nobody doesn't mean being worthless. It means being free. Free to flow from one role to another without fear of losing yourself. Think about the times you've been happiest. Was it when you were carefully managing your image? Or was it when you forgot yourself entirely immersed in music, laughter, love, or creation? In those moments, you weren't somebody trying to maintain an identity, you were simply alive. That's the beauty of being nobody. When you are not clinging to a self-image, you become like water, able to take any shape, able to meet each moment without the baggage of who you're supposed to be. And ironically, this is when life becomes the richest. Because you're not busy defending your story, you're living it. When we drop our identity, something extraordinary happens. Other people's opinions lose their power over us. If you're not trying to uphold a particular image, then criticism doesn't shatter you and praise doesn't inflate you. You're no longer a puppet pulled by the strings of external validation. Of course, society doesn't always like this. A person who isn't easily labeled can't be easily controlled. When you're nobody, you can't be boxed in, sold an image, or pressured to conform. That's why so many spiritual traditions talk about ego death. It's not about destroying your sense of self, but about releasing the prison of identity. The Zen masters have a saying, to be nobody is to be everything. At first, that sounds like nonsense, but think about it. When you stop holding on to I am this, you open yourself to being anything. When you let go of your fixed identity, you can fully enter the life of a parent, a friend, a stranger, a lover, a wanderer, without feeling you're betraying some static version of yourself. It's like being an actor who's free to play any role because they're not confused into thinking they are the role. The freedom is in knowing you can change the script at any moment. So, how do we begin to loosen our grip on identity? Start by noticing how often you say or think, I am, and fill in the blank. I am anxious. I am shy. I am successful. I am a failure. Every time you do this, you're locking yourself into a frame. Instead, see these states as temporary. You are feeling anxious, not being anxious. You are experiencing success, not being a successful person forever. Everything about you is in motion. And the more you remember that, the more you realize you've been fluid all along. Dropping identity doesn't mean you erase your history or pretend you're a blank slate. It simply means you stop confusing the map for the territory. Your life story is a beautiful map. It shows where you've been, what you've done. But it's not the same as the living, breathing reality of you in this very moment. And that moment right now is the only place you actually exist. When you're not trapped in the story of who I am, you can meet this moment fresh without dragging yesterday's script into it. That's where the beauty is. That's where the freedom lives. Here's the thing. People will still try to define you. They'll still say, you're the type of person who, or you've always been. But you can smile, knowing their words are only reflections of a moment, not a fixed truth. When you stop being somebody in the way the world demands, you stop running in circles trying to live up to expectations. You start living from the inside out instead of the outside in. And in that space, you might just find the most liberating truth of all. You were never the role, you were the actor, and the actor is free. Imagine standing on a beach, watching the waves. Each wave rises, takes shape, and then collapses back into the ocean. Your identity works the same way. It rises in moments, I am this, I am that, but then it dissolves, whether you want it to or not. The problem is, most of us try to hold onto the wave, to freeze it in place. We think, this is me forever. But the ocean has other plans. Everything changes, roles shift. Even the things you once felt defined, you can vanish overnight, leaving you wondering who you are without them. This is why clinging to identity can be painful. If your sense of self is wrapped up in your career, losing your job can feel like a death. If it's tied to a relationship, a breakup can leave you shattered. If it's based on youth and beauty, aging can feel like a personal betrayal. But when you stop identifying so deeply with any single role, these changes don't destroy you. You see them for what they are, just waves. They come, they go, and you are the ocean. Vast, spacious, unbroken. The ocean doesn't panic when one wave disappears. It knows more are coming. Here's something Alan Watts often said. You're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. Think about that. You don't have to drag yesterday into today. You don't have to carry the heavy baggage of all the versions of you that no longer fit. Yet, we cling. We keep the old clothes that don't suit us anymore. We keep living in old mental houses even when they're falling apart. Why? Because stepping into the unknown feels risky. If I'm not my old self, then who am I? That's the doorway. That's the invitation to find out. When you let go of the need to be somebody, life becomes more playful. You start to see identity like a set of costumes you can wear for fun rather than armor you must wear for survival. One day you might be the teacher, the next the student, the next the fool, and that's perfectly fine. You no longer need to win in the game of who's more important, more successful, or more admired. Because if you're not trying to be somebody, you're free from the exhausting competition. You can simply be without needing the world's scoreboard to tell you how you're doing. People often misunderstand this as detachment in the cold, uncaring sense, but it's the opposite. When you're not trapped in defending a self-image, you're actually more open to love, to connection, to intimacy. Why? Because you're not constantly filtering everything through, what does this say about me? You can truly listen to others, meet them where they are, and be with them without needing to fit them or yourself into a box. The irony is that when you stop trying to be special, you become profoundly unique, not because you're manufacturing it, but because you're letting your natural self shine without interference. Consider children. Before the heavy weight of identity is placed on them, they move freely between roles. A child can be a pirate, a chef, a dancer, a scientist, all within the span of an afternoon. They don't worry if it's consistent with their personal brand. They just play. That's the spirit you reclaim when you let go of being somebody. You remember that life itself is a kind of play, not in the sense of being trivial, but in the sense of being fluid, creative, and ever-changing. When you see it this way, you can embrace life's changes with curiosity rather than fear. Dropping identity also reveals how interconnected we are. When you're clinging to me and mine, you live in a constant state of separation, me versus them, my side versus theirs. But when you're nobody in the ego sense, those walls begin to crumble. You start to feel the subtle truth that you're not separate from life, you are life. The same consciousness that looks through your eyes looks through every pair of eyes. The same ocean that makes your wave makes every wave. And suddenly the idea of competing with others feels as absurd as one wave trying to outshine another. This doesn't mean you have to abandon all preferences or choices. Being nobody doesn't mean you drift aimlessly without any desires or values. It means you hold them lightly. You can prefer one path over another without building your entire identity around it. When you do this, you become more adaptable. You can pivot when life changes course because you're not gripping the wheel with white knuckles, terrified of losing who you are. And strangely enough, this flexibility often brings you closer to the life you truly want because you're not so busy resisting reality. The question then is, how do you live this out in a world that constantly pressures you to be somebody? You start small. Notice the moments when you feel the need to defend yourself, to justify your choices, to make sure people see you a certain way. Pause. Ask yourself, what am I protecting right now? Is it my actual life or just my image? Then, experiment with letting it go. Let someone think you're wrong without correcting them. Let a small criticism pass without defending your ego. You might find it's not as fatal as you imagined. Over time, you'll see that being nobody is not about erasing yourself, it's about dropping the layers that keep you from being fully alive. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that the truest joy doesn't come from being admired, respected, or remembered. It comes from living in this moment with open hands, able to receive whatever life is offering right now. Because when you're not clinging to who you are, you're finally free to experience the one thing that matters most. Not your story, not your image, but life itself. Here's a powerful practice. Whenever you introduce yourself, try describing yourself without mentioning your job, achievements, or roles. Just talk about what you love, what excites you, what you've been noticing lately. It feels strange at first, almost naked. We're so used to hiding behind the shields of titles and labels that without them, we feel exposed. But that's exactly the point. You start learning that who you are is not the same as the things you do. And the more you practice, the easier it gets to meet people without performing for their approval. In the West, much of our culture is built on the story of self-improvement, becoming a better version of yourself. While there's nothing wrong with growth, this constant pressure can turn into a subtle form of self-rejection. It whispers, you're not enough yet. You have to earn your worth. But the moment you tie your worth to an image, you've built a prison. Every improvement feels temporary because you're chasing an ever-moving target. When you let go of being somebody, you also let go of this exhausting race. You don't stop growing, you just stop growing to prove yourself. Alan Watts often compared life to music. The point of music is not to get to the end of the song, it's to enjoy the playing of it. If life is a piece of music, then identity obsession is like rushing to the final note just so you can say you played it. When you stop being somebody, you can dance with life instead of racing through it. Every note becomes enjoyable because you're no longer worried about how the song makes you look. You're simply in it, feeling the rhythm, without a finish line in sight. Of course, some people will misunderstand you. In a world obsessed with self-definition, being nobody can be threatening to others. They might say, "You don't take life seriously," or "You're avoiding responsibility." But in reality, you're taking life more seriously than ever because you're engaging with it directly, without the distortions of ego. You're not hiding in your resume, your Instagram bio, or your reputation. You're right here, living it. The irony is, this often makes you more reliable and present for others, because you're not constantly trying to manage an image in the background. So how do you balance this with the practical world, where people still expect labels and titles? Think of identity as a tool, not a truth. You can put on the costume of your profession when you need to, and then take it off when you don't. You can play the role without confusing it for your essence. This way, you're able to function in society without losing yourself in it. You can still be the doctor, the artist, the parent, or the engineer without believing those roles are the sum total of what you are. The beauty of being nobody is that it doesn't erase your uniqueness, it reveals it. When you're no longer locked into performing an identity, your natural quirks, curiosities, and talents rise to the surface effortlessly. You become more unpredictable, in the best way, less constrained by "people like me don't do that" thinking. You might try things you never imagined, explore paths you once ignored, or connect with people you previously would have dismissed. And because you're not protecting a rigid image, failure doesn't sting as much. It just becomes part of the dance. There's a profound humility in this way of living. You no longer need to be the smartest person in the room. You no longer need to have the last word. You no longer need to win every argument or prove your worth in every interaction. This humility doesn't make you smaller, it makes you spacious. It creates room for other people's truths, for new ideas, for growth without the constant friction of ego defense. And in that spaciousness, you discover that the joy of life isn't in dominating it, it's in participating fully, without needing to be someone special. Think of it this way, identity is like a mask. Masks can be beautiful and useful, but if you glue one to your face, it becomes suffocating. Being nobody is learning to take the mask off when you need air. And when you do, you realize something surprising: you can breathe easier. Conversations feel lighter, decisions feel freer. Even challenges feel less personal because you're no longer wrapping them around your sense of self. The less you cling to who you think you are, the more life can show you who you truly are. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual unlearning. You'll notice moments when the old need to be somebody flares up, maybe in a social setting, or at work, or even on social media. Instead of judging yourself, just notice it. Smile at it like greeting an old friend. Say, "Ah, there's that little actor in me again, wanting to take the stage." And then, if you choose, you can step back and watch the play from the audience instead of being trapped in the performance. In time, this becomes second nature. You still play roles, but you don't lose yourself in them. You still tell stories about who you are, but you know they're just stories. And in that freedom, something beautiful happens. Life becomes lighter, yet deeper. You can hold joy without fearing it will vanish, and you can hold sorrow without believing it defines you. Because you're no longer a fixed somebody fighting to survive, you're the vast, open space in which all the somebodies come and go. Once you see through the illusion of being somebody, you start to notice how much of your life was spent protecting that illusion. The arguments you had, the sleepless nights worrying about what others thought, the energy poured into appearing a certain way, all of it begins to look unnecessary. You realize that the image you were protecting never really existed. It was a projection in other people's minds, constantly shifting depending on their own beliefs, biases, and moods. How exhausting it was to try to control something you could never truly control. Letting it go is like putting down a heavy backpack you forgot you were carrying. And here's the magic: when you stop trying to be somebody, you become easier to love, not because you're doing anything to earn love, but because you're open. People can feel when they don't have to walk on eggshells around you, when they don't have to feed your ego for you to feel safe. Relationships become less about proving your worth and more about sharing your experience. Love flows more freely, not because you've perfected yourself, but because you've stopped trying to be perfect. Ironically, by letting go of being special, you become deeply special in a way that doesn't need recognition. Alan Watts often spoke about the absurdity of taking ourselves too seriously. Life, he said, is a kind of play, a cosmic game where the self hides from itself by pretending to be all these different characters. When you're nobody, you see the humor in it. You can laugh at your own mistakes without feeling diminished. You can admit you don't know without shame. You can even face your fears with a certain lightness, because you understand they're part of the grand performance. And in that laughter, there's wisdom. There's a recognition that we were never meant to hold on so tightly. This doesn't mean you won't sometimes get caught up in identity again. You will. The ego is a clever actor, always ready to jump back on stage. But each time you notice it, you'll have the choice to step away. You'll remember that the beauty of being nobody is that you can be anybody in any given moment. You're free to respond instead of react, to play instead of defend, to live instead of perform. The world becomes less like a battlefield and more like a playground. And that shift changes everything about how you move through your days. Think about the moments in your life when you've been most alive, completely immersed in what you were doing, without thinking about how you looked or whether you were doing it right. Those moments are identity, free moments. Nobody was performing in those instances. You were simply there. The practice of being nobody is really the practice of making those moments more common. Not by forcing them, but by removing the obstacles, mainly the constant need to manage your image. Life has always been here, waiting for you to show up without your mask. And here's perhaps the most liberating part. When you let go of identity, you stop comparing yourself to others. Without the scoreboard of who's ahead or behind, there's no need for jealousy or resentment. You see other people's successes as beautiful expressions of life, not as threats to your own worth. You see their failures as part of the same dance you're in, not as proof of your superiority. Comparison loses its teeth when you're no longer playing the game of being somebody. You're just here, doing your part in the unfolding of the universe. Some might say, but if I'm nobody, won't I lose motivation? And the answer is no. You might lose the anxiety that used to drive you, but what replaces it is curiosity and love. You start doing things because they feel alive to you, not because they'll make you look good. You work not for applause, but for the joy of creating. You help others not for recognition, but because you can't help it, it feels natural. It's not the death of motivation, it's the birth of authentic motivation. Being nobody doesn't mean disappearing from life, it means showing up without the armor. It's a shift from how do I look to what is this moment asking of me. You still have preferences, passions, and dreams, but you hold them lightly. You still set goals, but you don't collapse if they don't happen. You're more flexible, more open, more available to the surprises life offers. And perhaps, most importantly, you're no longer waiting for the world to validate you before you can feel okay. In the end, the beauty of being nobody is that it returns you to the truth you had as a child before you learned to be a role. You were just here. You didn't need to prove anything to be worthy of love or belonging. You lived in direct contact with life, without a thick layer of self-consciousness in between. And while you can't go back to innocence, you can go forward into awareness, a kind of second innocence, where you know the game, but you play anyway. Not because you need to win, but because you enjoy playing. So maybe the invitation is this: take off the mask for a while. See what happens if you stop introducing yourself as your job, your achievements, your roles. See what happens when you let conversations be real instead of rehearsed. Notice how much lighter life feels when you don't have to protect an image. Notice how much deeper your connections feel when you meet people as you are, not as you think you should be. Because in the end, The freedom of being nobody is the freedom to be everything, to be the sky instead of the clouds, the ocean instead of the waves, the vastness instead of the mask.
O dawn that breaks the song made new, we lift our hearts, O Lord, to you. Through trials we've known, your hand has guided, love has shown. Now bless the days that lie ahead, with daily strength and heavenly bread, through work and rest, through peace and strife, grant us your grace, sustain our life. Oh, bells that ring, our voices raise, let all the earth resound with praise. For Christ, the Alpha and the end, is ever near, our dearest friend. Renew our hope, renew our song. To you, O Lord, we shall belong. From year to year, from age to age, your mercy writes creation's page. New year dawns with hope and cheer. God is with us ever near. Alpha, Omega, Lord divine, guide us, keep us, love is thine. O gentle gift from skies above, the first snow falls with tender love. It crowns the earth in robes of white and fills our hearts with pure delight. Each flake descends a silent prayer, a blessing whispered through the air. The barren fields are clothed anew, and all creation sings to you. O Lord, your mercy falls like snow, so pure, so bright, our hearts belong. Renew our souls, refresh our sight, and make our spirits clean and light. With joyful steps we greet this day, the world transformed in bright array. O first snow, herald of God's peace, our songs of praise shall never cease. First snow falling pure and bright, clothing earth in holy light, gift of God from heaven's skies, peace descends, our hearts arrive. shall find release. The children play, the fields are blessed, the weary find in you their rest. Oh, flowing waters pure and free, you tell of God's eternity. O Lord of rivers deep and true, our lives we place in streams of you. From dawn to dusk, from night to day, your mercy flows in every way. River flowing pure and wide, Christ the living stream our guide. Water sings of love divine, endless grace through space and time. O gentle river, come and run. O gentle river, come and run. O longest night, O silent hour, we wait in faith, we trust God's power. Though shadows stretch across the land, we rest secure in His strong hand. The stars are burning, cold yet clear, a sign that night is drawing near. The darkness cannot hold its reign, for dawn shall come with hope again. Sing, O faithful, through the night, for Christ our Lord shall bring us light. The solstice marks the turning day, when fear and gloom are swept away. O Lord of time, O light of all, hear now your people as they call. From winter's night to morning's glow, your endless mercy we shall know. Longest night and starlit skies, hope eternal shall arise. Christ the light, our dawn shall be, Lord of time and victory. Sing, O faithful, through the night, for Christ our Lord shall bring us light. The solstice marks the turning day, when fear and gloom are swept away. Longest night and starlit skies, hope eternal shall arise. Christ the light, our dawn shall be, Lord of time and victory. O Lord, the snow begins to fade, the streams awake, the path is made. From icy chains the waters flow, your The earth is cleansed, the rivers sing a song of life to Christ our King. Each drop that falls, each stream that runs, proclaims the rising of the sun.
O living water, pure and bright, renew our souls, restore our sight. As snow departs and waters rise, your Spirit flows through earth and skies.
The barren land shall bloom again, by grace of God, by gentle rain. O Lord of seasons, strong and true, we lift our